time you get to be a celestial spirit, you're all good singers.
No harms.
No harms.
You can play hundreds of musical instruments at the same time.
You can play what?
Hundreds of musical instruments at the same time.
Wow.
So you're sort of like an orchestra conductor, so you're the orchestra.
That's so cool.
That's pretty fun.
And who's the audience for the orchestra?
You don't care about that.
That wouldn't be live.
Yeah,
You are the instrument and the audience.
yeah.
Like, oh, I like that.
Yeah. It's not a major thing to have an audience, you find.
It is lovely when you share little tidbits like that, because it's like sprinkles in an environment where it's in the hells, and you can't eat the ice cream and you don't want the sprinkles anymore. So you get some divine truth with a sprinkle on it.
Yeah, that's right. It's beautiful when you, many of you will have the experience after you pass that somebody will grab you and they'll take you for a little journey where they can take you beyond your own condition, and it's a pretty amazing experience.
Like a Frank or Frederick.
Yeah. And so they can sort of grab you, lend you their energy, and take you above your own condition for a short amount of time. And it's quite an overwhelming experience because you're not used to anything. Like it's the first time in your entire life that you've experienced that condition. So it's a very usually overwhelming experience, but it's also quite a memorable one as well. Yeah.
And then it would spark your desire to know that that's what is ahead of
Yes,
you.
oftentimes it does. Yeah.
But I also think faith, it would help you develop faith.
It does.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
real.
That's right, because it tells you what is beyond you is real.
Mhm.
Yeah, so one of the problems we have here on earth, isn't it, with our corruption of faith, is that when somebody tells you something loving is real, you sort of, I don't know whether that's true or not. You know, that just sounds like too good to be true
Yeah, it's fairy tale.
type of thing. Yeah, which is, and it's a quite common thing, isn't it, that we believe things are too good to be true.
Well, I thought you were too good to be true.
Fairy tale.
Right?
Yeah, well, nowadays, not many people believe that I existed even in the 1st century.
Right.
I find that quite funny, really. Yeah. Have all these memories of your own existence, and then people tell you that you didn't exist. It's strange.
You're just a metaphor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And are we missing Scott's not here yet?
I think it's just
Scott? No worries. All right, well, we were just having a chat outside about the concept of hierarchy of sin, and I just wanted to give you a little bit of extra information about this concept because it'll help you not be so overwhelmed by how many sins you're going to have to fix. So we've already presented to people, obviously, about the hierarchy of sin in terms of where it's connected to in your life. And remember, we've said there's the spiritual is the highest of the hierarchy, right? So any law pertaining to a spiritual concept is higher in hierarchy than any law pertaining to an emotional concept, which is lower in the hierarchy. You follow?
Mm-hmm.
And then lower in that, underneath that, you've got, as governing the human soul, you've got sexual stuff, which is quite low in the hierarchy. And then underneath that, you've got the physical. And of course, there's a lot of physical laws that govern our universe, as well as, I won't use that one, that govern our soul. So you've got, you could say that below here, below the in the physical realm, you've got physical laws governing physical things. So, you know, how the planets all work and how they revolve around suns and transmission of energy through space and all these other things. They're all governed by these physical laws. And then above there, these are all laws that govern the soul. So from the human perspective, the laws that govern the soul are the ones that mostly determine your sin. So you know how when we raise a physical thing like using toilet paper, well that is a physical thing in that realm, but there's actually a spiritual concept that governs your use of toilet paper. It's the concept of economy. If something is not economical, it is also not loving. So if you look at anything that's single use, such as toilet paper, that is being produced, it's taken a lot of energy to produce it. Obviously it's sucking out all the carbon out of the atmosphere for the tree, and then the tree is cut down, then it's mixed with water, made into a pulp, and there's a whole through heap of processes of rolling it and everything and squeezing it down into these very thin sheets that you can actually use as toilet paper, and then you wipe the bottom with it once and it's gone. So that's a single use item. Anything single use doesn't make a lot of sense. It's not economical. Because it's not economical, it's not loving. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the spiritual principle governing the use of toilet paper is actually economy, which is actually a very high spiritual principle. Now, if you apply economy to a lot of things in your life, you'll see a lot of areas straight away where you sin. An example of that is, we were talking to Kate before she passed. This was our friend Kate who passed last year. But before then, we live about 36 kilometres, which is about 20 miles around about from our nearest town. And she decided she wanted to get healthy. So what she did was she decided she was going to go to the gym in town to get healthy. Right? She was going to do it 3 days a week. So she's travelling 20 miles in, goes to the gym for an hour, 20 miles back home. 20 miles in, go to the gym for an hour or two, back home. And she was doing that 3 days a week minimum. And I talked to her about the principle, the spiritual principle of economy. Right? And once we talked about this principle, she could see, me doing this is not good for on any level, because I'm going back and forward, I'm using all this energy, and if we started adding up the carbon that was being produced just from the exhaust pipe of a vehicle to get into town and out, it was, she would have had to grow a tree every day to actually compensate for the amount of carbon she was putting in the atmosphere just to go to the gym. Right? So not economical. So what a better thing to do would be make a gym at home. Now you're not going back and forward all the time and every day for the rest of your life, and you're going to be able to use it over and over. And with the gym, if you use the right materials in the gym, such as only things that are not machines in the sense of not requiring energy, but rather are more sort of weights or other things like that, where you're using your own energy to do it, then of course those weights could be used for hundreds of years. So after they're yours, they can be your next generation, and their children's, and their children's, and their children's, and they'll still be usable oftentimes for hundreds of years to come, right? Rather than you running into a gym 3 times a week. Right? So the principle again is the economy. Spiritual principle, highest principle. Now you can see from that, if I go, okay, instead of me just looking at toilet paper as an issue, let's look at economy as an issue.
Because we have to say that a lot of the things that we talk about have come from us doing this, looking at the highest principles and then altering our lifestyle. So a lot of times when we travel, we're talking about small physical examples to demonstrate a principle, but to give you a practical, tangible example.
Yep.
But it's not about analysing your physical life, which I see a lot of people then get into, looking at their physical life, when that's very uneconomical actually.
Yeah.
The most economical thing is to look at the spiritual principles
First.
It'll have the biggest impact on your happiness. It'll make other decisions, your lifestyle decisions, much simpler, because you'll have got a principle, like you'll have made a shift on a principle.
Yeah.
sorry.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
No, that's good. That's a good
I'd
question.
like to know what are other spiritual principles that you could say out loud that we can think of.
Well, there's quite a few, because, but let's look at, so I've just raised economy, right, which is a spiritual principle, right? Another one is abundance.
Well, they're really related, aren't they?
So let's look at abundance. I might just switch that around now. And we'll wipe this off. Everyone's okay with, you've got those? Yep. Just wipe those off. Let's look at abundance. Unbeknown to most of you, most of your sins that you commit physically are due to the spiritual principle of abundance.
Wow.
So let's have a look at it. Not understanding it, in other words. So here's a good way to understand abundance. Physical example of abundance. I've got a peach seed. I plant it. Right? It grows. What eventually happens?
Hundreds of peaches.
It flowers.
Yes.
What does the flower do?
Pollinated.
Well, actually, it feeds all the insects, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So there's a symbiotic thing that it flowering, and also by the time it's growing, there's all these roots coming out. There's all these symbiotic things going on around the roots too, isn't there?
Yes.
There's a transfer of sugars, and there's a little atmosphere around every root that gets developed over time, and then it produces good things for the soil. So you plant the seed, and it's doing things to the soil. And then as it was growing, it's actually purifying the air.
Wow.
And then when it flowers, it's feeding the insects and birds. And also some animals that are dependent on nectar. Yeah? And then it's pollinated through another symbiotic exchange between insects and the plant. And after it's pollinated, you get the germination of a fruit. So you get a fruit, so a peach, in this case. I say peach because we've been eating them today. And inside of the peach is another seed. And not only does it do this once, it doesn't just do it once, does it, and then die.
No.
It does it, and in the case of a fruit tree, can do it anywhere up easily 50 years plus. In the first century, we had some olive trees that were like 500 years old.
Wow.
Been doing it for 500 years. Do you know what I mean? So you've got a seed, and that seed, if I plant it, what happens? Same thing happens. Now that's an example of abundance. Can you see? All you did is plant a seed in some good soil. And maybe you watered it, but if you planted it in the right location, you probably didn't even need to do that. But let's say you did, a little bit of water just to keep it. But all the other work is done by the design that God put in the seed. All the other work. And then the design he put in the fauna, underground. All that symbiotic work, God designed it all to work in cohesion with each other, symbiotically with each other. And then that caused the leaves to go, this caused the air to be purified, it sucks in carbon, puts out, and also carbon dioxide puts out oxygen, obviously. So you breathe, as well as getting food. As well as getting another seed to plant if you want more of them. As well as the animals and the birds and the insects all getting fed, all at the same time. Isn't that amazing? Right? It's a beautiful system, isn't it?
Yes.
It's an example of what God does. Like everything working in harmony, but also very economic All I had to do is plant the seed. Didn't have to exercise any other desire than plant the seed and tend for the plant a little bit here and there. That's all I had to do. The rest was all done by God. All done by design. Right? And not only did I benefit by being able to eat the peach, but lots of other animals and birds and insects have benefited through the process. The soil has benefited, the air benefited, everything benefited in the process. Just from me desiring to plant the peach. And you might have even done it without even thinking about everything that's benefiting. You might have just thought, I just want some peaches. And look what it did. It didn't just give you peaches. So you felt, I want peach, so I'm going to plant the plant. But God's going, but I want to do a whole heap of other things with the peach. I want to give the animals something to eat, and I want to give the birds something to eat, I want to give the insects something to live on, I want to also make sure that the next generation of peaches continues as well. Okay? So that is abundance. And we did it once, and for 50 years, how many of you have grown a peach tree? A few of you? How many peaches did you get per year?
I planted it fairly recently, so not too many, but maybe 5 or 10.
It was a small one.
Yeah.
All right, let's say it's about this big, only a small tree. Hundreds, right?
Yeah.
By the time it gets to a tree that's like as big as this room,
Yeah.
it's like thousands.
Yeah.
Like we have some mango trees in Australia where they're like 50 feet tall and like tens of thousands of fruit in one tree. So huge amount of abundance. Like one tree can feed not only all the animals, all the insects, all the birds, but also lots and lots of people all at the same time, right? Now let's look at it. Let's say another one of my lovely favourites is almonds. So again, we start off with the seed. It does all the same things to the soil, right? It grows all of its tree. The tree purifies the air. It flowers, does all the stuff for the insects, birds and animals. But it also grows a nut rather than a fruit around it. So no fruit around it. The fruit is the nut itself, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. It's kind of a fruit.
It's kind of a fruit, really, isn't it? But it's the seed itself that's the fruit. It does have a skin over it, obviously, which is the actual fruit of the almond. But most people don't eat it, although in some countries they do. They get it green in the Middle East, and they eat that as well. But in most Western countries we don't do that. But again, I can grab that seed, plant it, and another almond tree. Abundance. And on an almond tree, if you've ever been picking almonds, one time I did that for one summer, I think it was autumn actually, not summer in Australia, we pick almonds. But, one tree, thousands and thousands of nuts. What we used to do is we used to just shake the branches and we put a tarp on the bottom and all the ripe almonds would just fall on the tarp and we'd just pick up all these almonds and like big bagfuls of unshelled almonds just from one tree. And if you look at the nutrient density of an almond, or any nut really, it's highly dense in terms of nutrients. It's around about a third fat, a third protein and a third carbohydrate, and also quite a lot of nutrients in terms of elements that your body needs for survival, actually, in a nut. And these things all come from one seed. And then it's happening, there were some almond trees that we were looking at, they were 80 years old. Right? Now, they've been doing that for 80 years. Abundance. Everything's so abundant. Yeah? Right. So what should you eat? Is a good question, isn't it? Can you see from an economic point of view, it makes sense to have fruit and nuts as a fair portion of your diet because they are full of abundance. You follow?
Yeah.
Most other things you plant are you have to go and tend it to maturity. Let's say it's 3 months it takes for a vegetable to get to maturity, or 5 months if it's cauliflower or broccoli or something like that, get to maturity, and then you're going to have to let it seed, harvest the seeds and replant those seeds, but you have to replant the seeds every year.
Yeah.
With nuts and fruit, you don't have to do that. It's the most economical form of food because you don't have to do it every year. You know, you don't have to do it every season. So it makes sense to have a fair portion of your diet to things that don't have to be done every year. Right? Now, you eat meat. What happens? You grow the animal over years. It eats huge amounts of material in order to grow. You slaughter it, so you've got to kill it to eat it. And then when you kill it and you cut it all up and you eat it, it's done. So it's taken years and years and years and years to get to maturity, to the point where you can harvest it, as you would say if you're a farmer perhaps, and then it's a one-off thing, right? And if there wasn't refrigeration, you'd have to eat it within 7 days probably, or if you had some kind of cellar or cold cellar, it might be longer. But if you lived in our environment in Australia, it's like you'd have to eat it probably in 3 days or 2 days because it's so hot. And then it's done. And it benefits nothing else now. Nothing else is benefited through that process, right? It's consuming things, not giving to the environment, but actually taking from the environment as it grows. The difference between that and a peach is that it's giving to the environment as it grows. It's giving air, it's giving to the soil, it's giving to the insects, animals and birds. It's giving things to the environment. It makes sense logically to eat more of the things that give things while you consume them. Makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah? So you can see the principle of economy and abundance now working in harmony with each other. Yes? Okay. So that's the principle of abundance. God's designed abundance like everywhere in his universe, and we see it every day, probably without even thinking about it. Right? That's the reality. Now, if I was focused on those two spiritual principles, would I ever build a single-use item ever again? No, I wouldn't. So let's look at single-use plastic in the supermarket. Why is it done?
Convenience. Money.
Well, the very first reason why it's done is money. It's actually cheaper. It's less than 1 cent. Less than 1 cent to create a huge plastic bag. A lot of them are actually created from you could say the waste from oil production, petrol production. So it's actually waste matter used to create the bag, which is, in a way, it's good that at least they're using the waste matter to create a bag and not to use it for something else, right? But to create it for a single use, ludicrous, right? It'd be different if it lasted 100 years and it was exactly the same creation. And it would be different if after 100 years you had to go through a recycle period then. But obviously you're not using huge amounts of energy because you've used the thing for 100 years first, right? But if you try to recycle things from a single use, the recycling costs of recycling the thing cost more than the original bag itself and also the original use. Now that doesn't make any sense.
No.
It makes sense to produce something instead that's going to remain for 100 years or more and use that instead, right? But money drives a lot of our decisions. So when we say money, can you see our attitude to money is creating sins with economy and abundance. Right? So once you deal with your attitude to money, if you're focused on the economy and abundance and seeing it and feeling that in your life, you'll start making different choices with your money. You go into a shop, for most people, the very first they consider is, how much is that? How much is that? How much is that? They all look to me to be the same, so I'm going to get the cheapest one. It happens to be in a plastic container. And the other one happens to be in a glass one. But that's more expensive. So example of that, olives. We like Kalamata olives. Right? Kalamata olive, glass container, Kalamata olive, plastic container. Plastic containers, half the price. What does the average person do?
The half price.
Get the half price. Chuck it in the shop. That decision was just about money. A lot of our sins are our attitude to money, which is our attitude to abundance. Right? Is driving that attitude that we have about money. Right? If you look at a lot of things happening in the world today, it's all about money. Right? An example of that, you've got your mobile phone. You bought it with money. It's been designed, the software on it's been designed to waste your time. On purpose. It's no longer just a thing where you, hello, how you doing? You know, communicate something. It's now a thing that barrages you with information telling you that this phone is important for your entire life. That you need it as an appendage on your backside or in your pocket, like in your handbag or whatever, right?
Yeah.
You need it for life, to live, right? So it's a device, and it's been designed. The software in it's been designed to bother you as much as possible. It has, like ding. Oh, there I go on my phone. Ding again. Oh, there somebody just texting me. Ding. Like you can be doing things, and there's ding, 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 ring, ring, and you think about how often is it nowadays where you're doing things, and as soon as you get the mobile phone, what do you feel? Oh, someone wants to talk to me. Straight away. It's feeding your addictions.
Yeah.
It's been designed to feed your addictions. It's not just been designed as a tool, but it's now they're actually writing the software to feed your addictions. That's the purpose of it. Taking you away from the economic use of the tool. Right? Now, for most of you, you could get away with using your mobile phone maybe a minute a week, if you needed one at all. Now I know that they won't even let you access your bank account without your mobile phone. They won't let you access, like in Australia, we can't even do our taxation returns anymore unless we've got a mobile phone. And, you know, probably similar here, right? Unless you've got a mobile phone, there's a lot of things you can't do. But even with all that, my usage report, I do have a mobile phone now. I bought one just recently because I had to, because I couldn't do my banking anymore without it. Before then I could do it, but now no. So I had to get it to get access to our funds, but I use it, my usage report is 1 minute a week. Because the rest of the time it's just an annoying nuisance. It's bothering me all the time, interrupting me from doing things all the time, trying to push me into doing things I don't want to do, you know. I don't use it as an alarm clock because when I wake up, I wake up when the sun comes up and I go to bed generally when the sun goes down. When Mary asks me what the time is, I say it's 6:30 now. And I don't need it as a clock either, right? Because when you connect to the environment, you don't need any of those things anymore, right? So all it's used for is to interface with other technology, and that's it. And my feeling is, why did they create the other technology that it had to interface with in the first place to force me to have to use this thing that I didn't want to use? Right?
It's actually eroding your connection with another very important spiritual principle, which is sort of self-responsibility and the use of free will. the loving use of free will. It's trying to influence your will continually and take you away from your personal decision making, your personal responsibility for your decisions. Yeah. So that's the spiritual principles.
And they've written software purposefully to do that now.
Yeah.
So instead of the software helping me, the software is there to bother me. And be honest, it's the same with your cars now, isn't it? They felt that you weren't a safe enough person driving and that you didn't do safe enough things. So what they did was they designed the car to tell you what to do rather than you telling it what to do anymore. So it's no longer a tool, you're its tool.
Yeah.
That's most cars now, you're its tool. Driving along the road and you want to go across a bit because there's something and it tries to pull you back in the auto lane correction mode. You know, so what do most of you do? You get the car, it's got all these tools and you turn them all off. Because you're sick of the car telling you what to do. But when you open the door, it beeps at you. When somebody, and you want to leave the door open, it beeps at you. You want to leave the door open for a few minutes because you want to load something, it beeps at you. It's telling you what to do. It's trying to bother you. The software is being written to bother you. It's been written to annoy you, the hell out of you, until you do what it wants. That's what it's been written to do. Right? This is the way the world is going. A disrespect of free will. Disrespect of free will. But also is telling you you're unsafe now. You don't know what you're doing now, I'll do it for you. So it's getting you away from self-responsibility as well. Now everybody says, but there's so many safety benefits. I go, the most safe thing that God's ever created in the universe actually is all of God's laws that govern the human soul. Right? And the human soul has the capacity to be the most safe thing in the universe actually, because of those laws that govern it. So when you're taken away from self-responsibility, you're putting your trust in somebody else's will.
Yeah.
So if my will happens to be in alignment with God's, but the programmer's will of my device happens to be in alignment with the hell's, who am I obeying? I'm now obeying the person who's in the hells. Because the programmer fundamentally is the person determining what I should do. Right? What you can do. Right? And then when there's AI on top of that, well, the programmer who programmed the AI is now telling you what to do. Free will, self-responsible, all gone. Right? All gone.
And your physical health, because it's radiating you as you're using it.
Yeah, but if you understand radiation, the radiation coming from a phone isn't very much compared to the radiation coming from other things. And so I think that's less of a problem. I think the spiritual problem is a bigger problem.
Yeah, it's a much bigger problem because even if there's some physical detriment from the device, it's just affecting your physical body.
That's all it affects.
Whereas these principles, the self-responsibility, the free will, all of those things,
they're training your soul.
Yeah, your soul.
Right, and this is what I'm trying to figure out because I'm really affected by all that radiation so badly.
Well, if that's the case, then you're emotionally connected to some kind of annoyance.
Yeah, there's some other reason.
There's some other reason.
In your soul that's creating that reaction.
Yeah.
These are all, what I'm raising here is spiritual principles associated with these devices. Then of course there's also emotional principles, which are lower in the hierarchy. They're also associated with these devices. But they're less important than the spiritual principles. The bigger problem is how they're affecting your will. The bigger problem is how they're causing you to not be responsible for your actions anymore. You're putting the responsibility of your entire life in a program.
Yeah.
Your entire life. Like, this is not in harmony with God's feelings for you. God wants you to be responsible for your entire life, not a program, right? And we're putting the program, making it responsible for our life. So the worst thing it's doing is training your soul to be less responsible. Training your soul that it doesn't have free will. that a device is more important than you are. Training your soul that you're going to take this device with you everywhere you go. It's the lead up to them implanting the device in your body, which they're already trying to do.
Yeah, it's
I got those AirPods everyone wears all the time.
Yeah.
Correct? It's the same.
Yeah, I've been using them for 13 years, but they're always connected.
That's right, that's right. And all of these things are basically training your soul, and that's the bigger problem. Honestly, who cares about the radiation in comparison to that? Your soul can't be radiated.
Yeah.
But your soul can be, it's free will affected, and your soul can be less responsible, and your soul can not be in harmony with issues of economy, which are huge laws that govern and principles that govern the entire universe, right? Not just your body. Yeah.
And also the principle of equality, because it's training you to be subservient to the device.
To the device,
Right,
not
so
even a
it's
person.
Not even a person.
No, not even a
You're being
person.
trained to be subservient to a device.
Yeah.
It's also taking you away from the point I made with Joe yesterday about, you know, people being okay with their own experience. People, they've got an earpods in, or they've got their phone, or no one is ever still with their own feelings anymore, and it creates a level of demand. Then that person feels entitled to not be with themselves, which then in turn creates a lot of entitlement to be aggressive with anyone who is bringing them back to their own experience. So
Yep.
they're very high spiritual principles about humility as well that are being broken.
Yes.
Self-responsibility for our own feelings. All of these devices are.
Yeah. So can you see that if I was interested in, say, free will, and I really felt about free will as a principle, I would get my mobile phone and I'd probably put it somewhere where I just use it once a week or whatever when I have to do my banking or something like that. And even then I would complain to the bank and say, why am I having to use a phone to do your banking?
Yeah.
Like, why can't I come in and do the banking? Although sure, using my phone to do the banking is more economical than coming in and doing the banking, because coming in and doing the banking, I've got to drive there and I've got to do a whole heap of other things which are even less economical. But so it's economical to use my phone to do the banking, but why is it a phone? Why can't it be just, I used to have just this little clicker thing to do the banking. It took hardly, compared to the phone, it took hardly any energy to make. It was reliable, it worked all the time, it was easier to carry. I could take it anywhere. When we go on a trip, I didn't have to take a phone. Just took this little
To get your
key thing to authenticate.
Yeah.
Now, why do I even need that? It's because people are liars, dishonest. They want to take. They don't honour the fact that I have a bank and you have a bank. Right? So the whole reason why we're having to do it is because of somebody's sin in the first place. Because if people were honest, we wouldn't have to do it. So all of us honest people have to do it for all the dishonest people. That's the reason why we're doing it. So what we're doing is we're getting a bunch of dishonest people, they do some things, and then we get a bunch of solutions that are not economical or any of these things that are forcing you to do a whole heap of things against your operation of your soul to fix the problem of a bunch of people who are dishonest. And the majority of people, maybe not the majority now on earth, are honest anymore, but if we were all taught to be honest from childhood, we wouldn't even need it. We wouldn't even need security. You wouldn't need to lock your doors if we were all honest from childhood, would we?
No more bike locks?
No more, no more. Like I notice here in the US, you're really hot on night lights.
That's
Like
horrible.
whole place lit up
Yeah.
all night sort of thing. And it's interesting when I look at it from space, it's like North America is like bright. Even at night it's like bright. You can see it from outer space, right? So it's just and it's all to do with safety, security, fear, actually.
Yeah.
Fear. And that's all because we're afraid of the very few people who are dishonest. Alright? When I say very few, in comparison with the masses, it's very few. Instead of correcting the very few people who are dishonest, we want to correct all the masses to no longer have free will.
Yeah, that's what we're.
For the sake of the people who are dishonest. Yeah, to correct their behaviour.
So the sin drives the sin, drives the sin, drives the sin.
Well,
If you
it
want to
doesn't
comply,
have to.
if you want to comply,
Well, it
I
doesn't
didn't have a
have to.
cell phone, and it was a huge statement for myself to not get one, and the amount of difficulty it created for everybody else. And I just said, I have an email if you need to get a hold of me, and I have a house line.
Yep.
So I gave them a different direction, but it blew me away how many people were angry that I wasn't complying.
Yeah, but again, it doesn't have to be that way, does it? Well, for a start, if you look at 200 years ago, you couldn't just pick up a phone and annoy somebody who was even your neighbour across the road. You couldn't even annoy him by picking up the phone. You had to go and visit him to annoy him. you couldn't Facebook him about him to annoy him. You couldn't troll him to annoy him. You couldn't do all these other things to annoy him because you had to actually do it face to face, and the average person isn't really brave enough to do that, and so it often didn't happen.
We didn't even have voicemail back when I was growing up.
No, and I'm not saying these things are necessarily bad in the sense of having some communication is actually good, but if it becomes an addiction, it's no longer good,
Okay, I see.
right?
Yeah.
If it breaks one of these principles, it's no longer good. See, in the spirit world, when you send a thought packet, so many of you do this with me when you're angry with me, you send me a thought packet, right? So I get your thought packet, oh yeah, I know that Ron is angry with me again. And, there's been a few of those thought packets over the last 3 months, hasn't it? And so I know that if the thought packet's there, it's there already, and this is what's happening in the spirit world. These thought packets go back and forward, and you can accept them or reject them depending on what you want. And these things happen all the time. They're like emails,
Wow.
aren't they? But they're the thoughts of another, right, coming to you. That's the capacity of your soul. Now, if you were taught to use that capacity from childhood, now this capacity exists on earth as well as in the spirit world. If you were taught that to use that capacity from childhood, we wouldn't even need a phone. We wouldn't even need an email. We wouldn't need anything, actually. So God's designed a system that's very economical, and He gave you a communication mechanism, but because most of us are completely detuned from our soul and also completely detuned from our spirit body, we don't know how to use it. And we only learn how to use it when we're in the spirit world. But if we taught it from childhood on earth, we wouldn't need a lot of these things. But this is the other problem, is when we use tech to supply a lot of these things that we actually do have the capacity to do, without it, then we become reliant on the tech and we develop our soul even less. So there's another result of all of this process that we're going through. Now, all of these problems are spiritual problems. Can you see? They're all causing heaps of physical problems, but they are all, and they also cause emotional problems, and they cause sexual problems even, people, right? As well as physical problems. So nowadays, the way you have sex with another person somewhere else is by connecting up a whole heap of devices to your body and all your sexual parts and having a computer interface between the two of you,
No.
right? And that's where it's headed,
Oh, gosh.
right? So that'd be lovely experiences, won't they? Like irony, well, sarcasm. That's my first sarcasm for the week.
For the year? For the year?
For the year, perhaps. But it's like, how bad is that going to be for people because they never have personal interactions with anybody?
Well, as it is, isn't it that way? Isn't dating, like you used to meet
Isn't that
people,
what porn is really as
but
well?
you used to go out and meet people, and now you just have an app, don't you? And just hook up or
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Even
it's-
young people, like I've noticed at a counter, like when I go to purchase something, or the inability to
To communicate.
communicate, to look
To
eye to
connect
eye,
at you,
to
to look
connect.
at you,
It's
to
all these
listen.
gone.
QR codes or something, what do they call those?
Yeah, it's all gone, right?
Really sad.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, it's all
sad.
gone. But it's all gone because the spiritual principles of the devices are being broken. Do you follow? It's not because of the device itself. It's because of the way they're being designed and the way they're being utilised, and the software that's being written is all there to try to break the spiritual principle, because it's all developed for sin.
Yes.
So it's all to break the spiritual principle. You could have a phone and it could be perfectly in harmony to a large degree with the point of its creation and actually be beneficial if you did it right. I'm not saying that there isn't a lot of things you'd have to fix, because there would be. But even then, the fact that your soul can do it anyway without the phone, it's not really necessary. Right? It's just necessary if you want the ability without the development. You know what I mean by that? You need development to understand how communication actually works spiritually, and if you lack that development, then you won't have the ability. And so what a person then says to themselves, but I want the ability without the development, so what I'm going to do now is try to make a device that gives me that ability without me needing to go through the development. Right? But if we're all taught from childhood, then we wouldn't have that problem. Right? But you can see what the point is. Anything that breaks a spiritual principle is going to have a detrimental effect on all of the sins you commit. And there's going to be one spiritual principle, like economy, you're going to break hundreds of laws. If you break that principle, you'll break hundreds of laws. So every time you decide, oh, I went shopping today, got to go shopping tomorrow. Like, here's another example. In Europe, they make their refrigerators about a third or a half size or 3/4 sizes at the most, right? So what that means then is you can't, if you're going to be preparing your own food, your fridge is never going to be big enough for you to have a week's supply of food in it. So what that means is you're going to have to shop every 2 days. Right? So the design of the fridge, out of harmony with the economy principle, is now causing another economy problem. In that now, instead of going shopping once a week, you've got to go shopping every 2 days. Because there's not enough room in the fridge to go shopping any more often than that. You follow?
Yes.
Now, you can see you break the economy principle in one area, and now, for the most part, you're going to be breaking it lots and lots of times afterwards as well. So it's uneconomical to break the economy principle.
Yeah.
Which makes sense, of course. So just that one principle, understanding it in your soul and feeling it in your soul, can you see how many sins it's going to stop? You're gonna everything you consider doing, you're going to be looking at, is it economical to do it? Not money economical. Economical of time, economical of resources, economical of energy. Is it economical in all these areas? Right? If it is, and it's going to be something we can reuse over and over again, then do it. And do it well. Do it like high quality possible. The best you can do. You know, so rather than buy a plastic bucket, you buy a stainless steel one. That kind of thing. Right? Because the stainless steel one, for the most part, depending on its use, is probably going to last longer. You know, instead of buying like a glass dish, get a stainless steel one. Because the glass one, you might drop it. And it's broken. Mind you, it's recyclable, the glass, but you've got to heat it up to, what is it, 700 or 800 degrees centigrade, or 13 or 1400 degrees Fahrenheit or something, to melt it again and do it all again. That's a lot of energy. Stainless steel one, you drop it, it's just going to have a little ding in it. And you can get out there with a little hammer and tap it out if you want. Still usable. If you keep it clean, it's going to last your entire life. Your entire life.
What happens in the spirit world? So a lot of these issues go away when you leave
No,
Earth.
they don't. No,
I'm
they don't.
saying you're not looking for stainless steel, are you?
No, but the economy principle, if you don't understand it, in the spirit world, you will do things like
Like,
trying to progress without dealing with your emotions.
okay, that's what I was looking for, is what,
Yeah, and this is the benefit of focusing on the principles higher in the hierarchy, is that you're going to solve problems in your physical life easier, but also you're learning eternal lessons, if you like. Things that are going to help you to progress and grow, whether you're here in the spirit life, and
Yeah.
bring you happiness, bring you better relationships. Yeah.
Yeah, they build things, by the way, in the spirit world. In the hells, you build things. You do.
oh,
They build houses to live in and other things like that. They actually physically build them.
They have the
I didn't know
typical
that.
carpentry tools there?
They have tools
Here
to
on
build
Earth?
them, yes.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, and so forth. Because their soul's not even capable of building something yet.
Oh,
You understand?
okay.
By the time you get up to the second sphere, your soul is building the location,
Oh,
right? But in the lower parts of the hills, you end up, your soul's already built you a shack, right? And it'll be like a smelly, dingy, rat-infested, like oil-covered piece of crap. It will be, right? Smell like crap as well. It smell like poo, and this is what it's like in the hills, and you're going to have to live in it, right? So the average person goes, I don't want to live in that. Their soul built it. They don't want to live in it. So what do? They try and get the materials from that thing and build something better. So they do all this work to build it better, only to find that it's very difficult to build something better given their condition and given the materials. And it still smells. But they think it's better. So, and then in the higher spheres of the first sphere, you do build things that way, using manual methods. Of course, it's completely unnecessary in the higher spheres, but you don't know that because you're in the sphere where it's necessary. Yeah?
what would be the highest there in the spirit world where they're still building things that are much more like out of the science fiction realm?
Probably the second. Yeah.
That's the soul could do, but you're just using.
Yeah, by the time people get to the third, generally they respect the buildings they were given,
Okay.
that their soul has created. And by the time you reach the sixth, there's a lot of things you'll do, but you also respect that you do them with your feelings, not with your manual
Right.
tasks.
Okay.
Yeah. But in the lower spheres, it's like, yeah, out there with the tools and implements that you've created, hewn out of the rock sometimes. Yeah, just like you would if you were a caveman. Yeah.
When they get there, do they try and clean that messy little place out and just keep trying and not getting it clean?
Well, no, because a lot of times the condition of their soul is such that they don't mind living in an unclean space. But when you first arrive, that's when it's tricky. So many of you are used to comfort here, and your first house, if you don't deal with your sin, your first house is not going to be very comfortable, right? So you'll want to build something different. But unfortunately, you won't be able to move from that location into a higher location to build something different. So you're going to have to build something from the materials that are already there, right? Some people do that. They'd rather do that than work on their soul and get out of that condition.
Wow.
Yeah. Isn't that what many of you are doing with your sin? You'd rather put up with your sin than get out of your sin. So why would that attitude change? It's not going to change magically. It's going to be something you're going to have to change. Yeah. So yes, this is what happens. So any of these lessons you learn about the spiritual principles, you learn them now. They're going to benefit you not only now, but also through the rest of your existence. After you pass, it's going to benefit you then too. All the way through.
So how does self-responsibility coincide with God reliance?
Good question.
Excellent question.
Yeah. What's the answer?
Yes, have a go.
Well, no, my problem is that I keep thinking I need to be self-responsible, take responsibility for what I do, not be a bother to others or a burden or ask others for money or whatever.
Yeah.
By doing that, I'm focusing on I don't need anybody's help, I gotta do it on my own. and I don't know how to say, no, God's gonna help me with that. I can,
Well,
or, yeah.
well, let me have a go before we talk about your. Jesus is going to want to talk about your emotions, but let's just talk about it as a principled question, right? Self-responsibility is really my heartfelt desire to know and feel all of my own feelings,
To love yourself.
to love myself, and to embrace my free will in harmony with God, with God's laws, with God's principles, if you like. So that's me being self-responsible. Now, that's, if you like, my job as God's, if I'm going to,
The pinnacle of God's creation.
yeah, as God's highest creation, that's my potential and really what God desires for me. But there's a lot of space for God in that, if you think about it. Because if I want all of my feelings and I want to embrace my free will in harmony with God's laws, I'm going to seek God's truth. I'm going to want to know God's love is going to help me to understand love, understand law. I'm going to not put onto God responsibility for my feelings.
Or responsibility for anything you're capable of doing yourself.
Yes, because I'll want to experience my capacity as the highest of God's creation, so I can create things. But most of the time people come to God because they want God to fix their feelings.
They want God to do all the things that they don't want to do for themselves.
That feel hard or, frustrating or grief-stricken or all of these things, or hopeless. Or we come to God with those feelings and say, God, help me.
Rescue me.
Which is not God-reliance. It's not self-responsible. In fact, once you come to God with the feeling, my feelings are all mine. I can feel them. I can feel
Not
all
just can, but I'm going to have to.
And I want to. They're part of my experience. I want them. That's the first time you can really receive God's love. Because then the love coming as a gift. And you can't really receive love unless you feel it as a gift. And God's not going to try and help you get away from this self-responsible state. So a lot of people think God-reliance is like, oh, I'll just hand it all over to God and God will fix all my problems. But that's actually the opposite of God-reliance.
Yeah, and whoever tells you what to do then is not God.
It's not God. And whoever helps you out
Yeah.
to avoid your own
Usually a dark spirit.
situation.
Yeah.
God wants you to know that you can deal with your own pain and suffering and create a life of joy and abundance.
And you are responsible for all your sin.
If you like, God's an entity who can love us through that process, who can teach us through that process, but is not going to take over that process or not going to minimize the effort you have to do in that process. Because to do that would be to undermine your potential as his highest creation.
And undermine your free will.
Yeah. So, I think inherent in your question is a lot of feeling of like, well, how does God help me? If I've got to do all this stuff for myself, what about God? How do I get God's help in this? But really the way you get God's help is by doing the work that is your own and seeking God's wisdom, seeking God's love, seeking God's truth in that process.
Yeah.
And what do you want to say?
That was a good answer.
Yeah, good.
Do you get it, Katerina?
Yes, because I want to say now that all my life, my thoughts are when you have a problem, you ask God to fix it.
Yeah, no, when you have a problem, you first try to solve it yourself.
You examine the problem. You need to know what the problem is, don't you?
And why it came about, and what its cause is.
Yeah. So, but that's not, a lot of us want God just to take away the problem without first knowing.
That's what I want.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I want. I want to ask for God to help me. And
Because you want him to take away the problem without understanding how you created it.
A lot of times we don't even ask God, what is the problem here? What is the truth about what I've created? Because God wants to help with that.
Yeah.
But a lot of us are like, no, God, just make it go away.
Yeah. And he's not going to do that.
Never.
Ever. He never will make something go away that you do not understand how it got created.
Yeah, and
Because to
aren't
do that
going to
would
put in
be,
the effort to
and aren't going to put in the effort to fix it.
fix it.
You can't do that because you will not understand and you will do it again.
Yeah.
You,
And
you
yeah.
need to get to a point where you understand your problems so that you can fix them permanently and you don't do them again. And the only way that that's going to happen is if you take personal responsibility for your problems.
Yeah.
Makes sense? So we go there and there.
I think going off of that, asking God to help you, I could also interpret that as help me help myself. So, or what do you guys think about that?
Well, you could.
Asking God to help you.
You got to be
for your
careful.
willingness, or
Well, no, you're in charge of your will. So God can't really go G you up into using your will,
yeah.
because that would be, you'd be creating a dependency then.
Yeah.
If I always needed Jesus to go, come on Mary, you can do it, you're right.
Cheer squad.
You know,
So you
then
want God as your cheer squad.
every time I hit a problem I'd be like, oh, can you just tell me that I can do it? And that's not me gaining self-responsibility, you know.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And you have to be careful as well in the way that we relate to God. Like Katerina was very honest. I want God to take away my problems. It doesn't matter if you come and go, oh God, I realise I have to take responsibility and, you know, could you just give me some truth about this issue? If you really feel like, can you take away my problem? You know, you're better off being honest and examining your lack of self-responsibility in that place than trying to alter your prayer intellectually, if you like.
So a lot of you try to reframe things with God because you're so used to reframing it with people and you've gotten away with it. And so you go up to a person and you say, oh, I would like you to do that. No, let me restate, would you be able to do this for me? Instead of just saying directly,
Are you interested in doing it?
are you interested in doing this? You know, but it was funny when we met early days, Mary and I, we'd be driving along, Mary would want a cup of coffee or something like that. So she'd say to me, do I want one? No.
Yes, I was well trained not to express my desires.
Does that make sense? But that's also not taking responsibility for what your desires actually are, right? Now, God, so you go to God and say, do you want to do this for me? And God will just go, no. The answer to that will always be no, right? Because we're insincere in the motive of asking, right? And so, of course, the answer is always going to be no. and then people go, oh, I can't feel anything from God. Yeah, that's right, because you're asking all these insincere things, not understanding the principles upon which love is built, upon which the emotion of love flows. And these are all laws that govern the emotion of love and how it flows. And if you don't understand them, then you think, oh, I was loved in my childhood when, you know, whenever I needed rescuing, I just went to Daddy and he rescued me.
That's love.
That's love. And you've grown up, many of you are still, some of you are in your 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and you're still children needing rescue from somebody. But mum and dad have died now, so what do? You feel so alone. Now mum and dad have died, you know, because there's no one to rescue anymore, and now it's up to you. And now your kids even think you should be the one rescuing them. And it's sort of like, but I have enough trouble trying to rescue myself, like, you know. And so we're no longer the pinnacle of God's creation. We're now these little dependent ants, you know, trying to have these interactions because we're not seeing ourselves as God sees our capacity. So very important to understand that these principles are very strong principles that should guide life, but every time I break the principle, I'm committing hundreds of sins.
Yeah, and you can see that self-responsibility, when I break that principle or when I don't have that principle inside of me, creates a lot of emotional addiction, a lot of physical addiction, because I'm always seeking someone or something to get me away from what I feel, to get me away from solving my problems. So, yeah, you can see how it creates emotional issues. Sexual, a lot of people get married just because they feel like their partner is going to rescue them from their feelings, do the hard things that
financial
they don't want to do.
Safety or something like that.
Yeah. So that, you know, then you're creating sexual sins.
He loves me so much. He makes me feel good about myself. So what are you really expecting? that the love is going to make you feel good about yourself. No, that's your responsibility. You need to make you feel good about yourself. You understand? No one else should have that responsibility. No one. Because if you put that responsibility on them, now your happiness is dependent upon them making you feel something, not you feeling it.
That's
Right.
not loving.
Out of harmony with love. It's not love. It's a addiction, dependency. So, you know, these principles are so important to grasp. And in 2016, the third assistance group in 2016, if you go to the 2016 downloads on our website, you'll see there's a whole thing about God's loving laws. And that it mentions 17 principles, right? These are sort of fundamental principles that every person on earth should be taught from like childhood babies, right? Because they are the governing factors that govern love. They determine whether something's love or not. If you understand those principles, you understand what love is. So when somebody comes along and says, I'll rescue you, instead of seeing it, oh, isn't that lovely? You'll go, that's very unloving. Do you see the difference? Because you recognise the principle. When somebody comes along and says, you've got some lack in your life, so I'm going to give you something to make you feel like you've got more abundance in your life. Right? And somebody comes along and does that, you'll be going, that's not teaching me how to create my own abundance. Out of harmony with the principle. Right? Somebody comes along and says, look, I'll educate you. You go, great. I need education, right? And I'll take on board education that's in harmony with love because my life will benefit because I'm a self-responsible person. And one of the first points of self-responsibility is to educate yourself. Not rely on somebody else to educate you, but you educate yourself. And the problem is on earth today, we're taught that you go to school for the education and then you go perhaps to university if you need to for the education or to an apprenticeship or some other thing to get an education, you know. And then once you stop your education, you're set for life. Now in practice, have many of you found that to be true? Not really, right? But even if you did find it to be true, you're actually not being responsible for your further education. And the very biggest thing you can do is to neglect your own education, right? Because that's an act of irresponsibility. Like, it's very, very irresponsible for us to live on earth and not understand it. The majority of us don't even understand how a tree works. We don't even understand how the earth breathes. We don't understand that if you cut down the trees, you stop the whole breathing mechanism. We don't understand a lot of these things because we've never been educated. And it's we all go, but I wasn't taught that at school. It was too bad. You live in this world, you see the tree, surely you should work out how it works. Surely. And if the science is available to you to discover, surely a part of your developmental process would, this is the environment that I'm living in, surely I should understand it.
Well, really anything that we use, we have a responsibility
To understand.
So our phones even, how many of us even understand how our phones work, or even how to update software on your own computer? All these things are actually things that when we're self-responsible,
You don't get somebody else to do.
yeah.
Yeah? So did you know there's 120 billion transistors inside of one of your mobile phones? So these are little devices that years ago used to take up like about that much space, one transistor, and now there's 120 billion of them in your back pocket, right? Now somebody took responsibility to learn all that. Someone. And they used it in all different ways. They had to learn how to, send radio waves and receive them. They had to learn how to encode them. They had to learn how to turn voice, which is an analog thing that goes with sound, and they had to convert that into digital signals that then had to be transmitted over air to a receiver and then connect somehow to another one. They had to learn how to do all of that in order for you to have a mobile phone, right? Somebody was responsible, but it wasn't you. Right? Now, it's wonderful when somebody's willing to do that and teach the world how to do it, because there's benefits to everyone in the world, potentially, you know, from that thing. But you can see that if everyone on earth took the idea, or had the concept, I'm going to be responsible for understanding things, understanding what I use, can you see information would not be lost to humanity when there's a cataclysm or some kind of event? It would all be in your heads. It would all be as a part of your soul. The information would be there, but unfortunately the majority of us go, I don't care about that, I don't care about that, I don't care how a tree grows, I don't care how to grow my own food. We're meeting a lot of people who come to help us in God's way who have never planted a plant their entire life.
Wow.
Ever.
Wow.
Right? A lot of younger people in particular. Never planted a plant their entire life. They don't even know what to do to plant the plant. And yet they eat them, or the produce of them, every day. That's very irresponsible to not even know how they got there. Right? And this is a problem. Once you get the principle, you go, I need to take more responsibility. I need to take responsibility for my spiritual development, my emotional development, my sexual behaviour, and my physical life. I need to. If I live in harmony with that, now I'm going to live in harmony with a lot of laws governing my soul. But if I break that, I'm going to break a lot of laws governing my soul. You follow? So this is how you bring your life into more harmony with law, by understanding the principle and then going, right, where is that principle playing out or not playing out in my life? And then I can adjust my behaviour and adjust my life to make sure I'm bringing more and more things every day into harmony with that. Yeah? That's what we do.
Now, is everyone very hot? Not a little
Well,
bit.
the air
You're
comes
okay?
on and there's
I was just thinking of venting a bit of hot air out the back, that's all. I just saw some people. Yeah. Maybe just open it for 5 minutes.
There are fans that we could put on.
We can turn the fans on a little bit, but all that's going to do is bring the hot air down
It
probably.
is probably. Yeah, see that just
Yeah.
creating.
Oh, that's a bit, yeah.
The question about the whole faith healing thing.
Yep.
Lay on hands on somebody, pray
Yep.
for them. They've gotten cancer, they've gotten this, or they have this ailment from
Yep.
whatever's going on.
From the law,
Right?
from breaking the law.
Choices and sins and stuff.
That's right.
And then we gather around them and they actually get healed.
Yes, well, it would be spirits who are helping them break the law.
That was my question. Is it, okay. And then the ones that experience healing,
Yep.
is that all other spirits then? They're saying, well, God healed them.
Which is not true, because God created the law that actually caused the original problem.
The only way that it could happen in harmony with law is if the person reaches a place of repentance about the sin that created the illness.
Not into that. Also
And-
has faith
And has faith that they can be healed.
that God's love can heal them.
Yeah,
But they have to reach repentance and a point of faith.
yeah, yeah. Otherwise, it's going to be spirits who don't respect the law, working on the spirit and physical body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you did healings 2,000 years ago,
Yep.
like the blind man and so on
Yep.
and so forth, they were repentant at that time? And
In the
they had
moment,
faith?
yes, and they
Okay.
exercise faith in the moment, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Because I know there was, in the Bible it says there were many you could not heal, and I'm
Yes.
supposing for these
Most
reasons.
I could not do.
Yeah.
Most. And also, some of the ones I did heal afterwards changed their behaviour to be more sick.
The ones you did heal?
Yeah, like sometimes sometimes I would heal somebody, and instead of them being thankful, they would go and use the healing to commit more sin.
Wow. Even though you did tell them to sin no more.
That's right. That's why I used to say to them, sin no more. But oftentimes they would not listen.
Free will, free will.
Free will, right? And they would go off and then use their newfound ability to get all the things that they missed out on before.
Wow. And would they develop the same disease 6 months later.
Well, often not the same disease, but other diseases. Yeah, yeah.
Can they temporarily heal without repentance, or is that always spirit?
It's always spirits.
Okay.
Yep. Yep.
Hmm.
Yep. Faith and repentance are required for healing.
Thank you.
Again, breaking the law, you see, and spirits are just as prepared to break the law as you are.
Mm.
So what happens when you get afraid of your own death? You're prepared to break quite a lot of laws. Right? Now, if it's a physical thing, you know, where you're starving, you're probably willing to steal in order to get the food. You know, you're willing to break a law regarding taking from people without asking, you know, which is an issue of love. When you're, you know, doing things that you feel your life is threatened, that's probably when you'll feel like breaking the law the most. In fact, many women who have abortions for the purpose of their life being threatened. They feel their future life is threatened by the birth of a child. Their future, the way they saw their life for their future, is threatened by being pregnant. And so they decide to abort the child. So they're willing to commit a murder in order to... And by the way, it's not just women, is it? The men often are encouraging them. So the men are often more responsible even than the women are. Sometimes the women would like to have the child, but the man doesn't want them to, and they feel more bound by their approval to get the man's approval, and so they do it. But in that case, it would be the man who's primarily responsible, right, for the death of the child. But we're willing to even commit murder, as in the case of an abortion, rather than feel, rather than be responsible, rather than, you know, love. Yeah. That's how addicted to our sin we are.
Yeah. Does anyone want to talk about how they felt feeling their resistance to sin, their homework?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I started feeling kind of angry.
Yeah.
And then thinking, what are other people going to think if I start wiping my bottom with a towel instead of
Yeah.
And I still haven't used it.
Yeah.
So I've used the towel roll and just like
Well, wash it with water first before you use it.
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
But yes, so it's like a lot of shame.
Yeah.
So worrying about how
Worrying about others' opinions. Yeah. Some of our biggest sins are because we're concerned about how others think and feel.
Or view us. Yeah.
How they view us. Yeah. So that's a big thing for most people. And that's a spiritual principle, actually. The spiritual principle, if we look at this spiritual principle here, the spiritual principle of self-responsible and also honouring your own free will, you're allowed to choose to do anything you desire without considering anybody else.
As long as it's in harmony with love.
Of course, if it's in harmony with love, then it will benefit other people too. But if it's in disharmony with love, then it's probably going to harm them. Right? But free will says you're allowed to make the decision.
And that you should be responsible for how you use your will.
Yeah.
You should make decisions based on your desires and not others' desires.
Yeah. Makes sense?
I had a bunch of them, and I don't know if I really hit the mark of the question, but
Far away.
the first thing I notice is if I'm in a situation, I go into blame.
Of whom?
And how unloving blame is. It'll either be for myself or the other. It can be either way.
Yeah,
It's not always of myself, though I do like that one.
Or God.
Yes. Or God, of course. Yeah, well, he often gets that.
Yeah, you created, look at me, I'm so imperfect. You created me. It's
Right,
your fault.
Right. I also notice judgment.
Yeah.
Another way. Maybe these are more ways I avoid feeling the sin.
They are.
That was the question, though, wasn't it? What does it feel like when I resist
sin?
When I
resist the humility
when I
about
fight
sin.
for my sin.
When I fight for my sin.
This is
judgment
feelings. Okay, cool.
That is when you fight for your sin. You
the other thing I notice is I'll get into competing and comparing.
Yes.
Really get into that.
Yeah.
And then of course the ones we all know, fight, freeze, or flee.
Yeah.
Those are very, And another big one for me, I pretend it didn't bother me. And like, oh, man, I guess that's the facade.
The Americans
Full
are very
force.
good at this.
You
I
are.
pretend I'm not even hurt.
Yeah.
Or however I'm real angry, or however I'm really
It's
feeling, I
required.
pretend,
Yeah.
oh, I'm
I'm
good.
chill.
Oh, I'm great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So those were the key ones that came up
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah.
And how unloving all of them are.
Yeah, you go to Brazil and the average person you meet, you know when they're upset.
Yeah.
You come to America and you have no idea unless you can feel them.
Yeah.
You got no idea.
It's a big breaking of the truth principle, actually, that when you pretend nothing,
Oh,
that
yeah.
it hasn't affected you.
Yeah.
Yeah, affects your ability to, and your humility, because you're distancing yourself from your own experience.
You're creating a facade.
Mm.
And every time you create a facade, remember facade is based on the idea of being false, and everything being false and not in harmony with truth. So immediately you've committed one of the greatest sins.
Yeah. And I can feel now and know now. Because I did not want to feel certain feelings. And I actually thought I was brilliant. Boy, people don't know I'm upset. I mean, like, you know.
How
So-
clever am
Some
I?
How
would
clever am I,
feel
yeah.
would.
Yeah.
So
Like,
you're
I was
proud,
really, I was proud of it.
proud of your
I
sin.
mean, I'm happy
Proud
to
of
say I'm
being
not in
chill
the same
when
place.
actually,
But it was terrible, right? But yeah. But
Yeah.
I thought it was a good thing.
It's a kind of a superior thing, isn't it?
yeah.
Yes, and that's the other thing I noticed. I can have a lot of feelings of inferior, but I have also, I have both. I
Yeah.
definitely have both.
Well,
depending on the
usually you
situation.
have one in some areas and the other in
Yeah.
other areas, you know.
Yeah.
That's normally,
Yeah.
and both of them are sins.
Right.
Inferiority as well as superiority.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because they're not equal, right? They're not based in equality, which is a sub-aspect of love. Yeah. So if you look at love, truth, humility, faith, you'll find there's a lot of sub-aspects of each thing. So economy is a sub-aspect of love, right? Abundance is a sub-aspect of love. Equality is a sub-aspect of love. Yeah? Self-responsible is a sub-aspect of love as well as humility.
As well as faith, really.
Yeah.
Lots of.
Yeah.
There was one more big one, sorry. When someone's telling, like, yeah, that often someone will be saying something and it doesn't apply to me. It
Yeah.
doesn't apply to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Denial.
And that's when I know it really,
Really
applies
applies
to
to
me.
Yeah, not always, you know.
Not always,
When you
but-
become a celestial spirit, everything won't apply to you.
Well, when I'm here, yeah.
But you-
Well, any sin won't apply to you.
Yeah.
Somebody says, you're sinning, and you go, no, it doesn't apply to me.
That would be nice.
Yeah, who else?
Who
was
else?
over here? There was some. Okay, so let's go.
I noticed since I even came to the States this time, I just felt on edge all the time.
Yeah.
And then it came down to feeling like I have to do things quickly and I just get on with it. And I wasn't stopping and slowing down and considering what I'm doing because I had this feeling, like it reminds me of economy and abundance, of I had this feeling of lack.
Yeah, but
Lack
also
of time.
stoicism, right? Too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've got to do it.
Tough it out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And many people
Yeah.
have a very strong pride in toughing everything out.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, and
Men in particular,
yeah.
because men are taught from childhood that you don't show your feelings so much. And if you cry, you're a crybaby. You're just like a girl, and all this kind of stuff. And of course, God gave you tear ducts, just like He gave a girl tear ducts. So that God's intention was that you were going to cry at some point, right? But the average man is just trying to shut all that down. So there's this very strong feeling of stoicism and pride in it.
Yeah, and I actually
Pride.
felt, I could feel I was just actually resisting a terror inside. I was just terrified.
Yeah.
From like being on the road driving, I was terrified.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's my biggest area.
Yeah. Not your biggest, but yeah.
No, the biggest, I noticed, but I noticed.
Yeah, you'll find that the things you're aware of are not your big things.
No.
Yeah. That's usually always the case because, the things we're unaware of, you remember this is the subject of our discussion, the things you're unaware of are the things you need to know about more, but usually they're the things you believe are more truthful and you're already in harmony with love with them.
Well, just you saying stoicism, I hadn't been very
Yeah.
aware of that, but as soon as you said it, I'm like, yeah, I
Yeah.
recognise that.
Yeah. But you can even see, like in some of these areas where the person's going, I'm God reliant, when actually they're irresponsible.
Yeah. Oh, that's
Yeah,
another
things
thing. I
like
was
that.
noticing irresponsible. Like I rented electric car thinking that'll be good. But then I realised I was totally not being self-responsible in learning how to do it. All the technology was beyond me. Basically.
Yeah, so in other words, encouraged to do something and then not willing to learn how to do the thing.
Yeah.
So that's lacking self-responsibility.
Yeah, I wanted to give up.
And a lot of people there, you drive them. Somebody else do it for me. Because I don't want to learn it. I don't want to have to go through the trauma.
Yeah.
Oftentimes we feel. And why do we feel so traumatic about learning something? Well, obviously that's related to childhood issues generally, where there's trauma in our childhood about learning that we're now applying, and
it must be stupid.
Yeah, and we're taught a lot of things in our childhood. So that's all about avoiding emotion.
Yeah.
Which is also irresponsible.
Yeah.
The higher spiritual principle. It's irresponsible for you to not have your emotion. Can you see? It's also not loving to you to avoid your emotion, because your emotions are a large part of you, and also your emotions are a large part of your future joy. How do you experience joy? You have to have some emotions to have joy. Yeah. Right? You can't be like a stoic rock and then have joy. Because all of these, you've got to learn how to be an emotional being to have joy. Yeah. So obviously every time you try to shut down your emotions, you're not being loving to yourself by shutting down your emotions. Right? So you're sinning against the design of yourself when you don't want to feel your feelings. And of course there's going to be consequences. You're going to get shut down, you're going to feel shut down, you're going to lack desire, you're going to lack motivation, and there's going to be all these other consequences because you're not having your feelings. Yeah. Right? Every time you break a spiritual principle, which is the highest in the hierarchy, it's going to have a net effect on a lot of other things. So an example of that is I'm shutting down my emotion and I find I don't have much sexual connection anymore. Right? Many women have a duality with their emotion. In other words, they sort of compartmentalise emotion. And the reason why they do that is they've learned over time, and usually through their childhood, but also there's been generations of this, where if you express your emotion with a man who's got physical power, then he may damage you physically with that power. And so it's best to shut down emotions under certain circumstances. And so most women have learnt to be one emotional person with their children, and another type of emotional person with their parents, and another one with their friends, and then a different one altogether with their husband or their partner. And then they wonder why there's no sexual connection anymore with themselves or their partner. But there's all this shutdown in the higher area of emotions that now is going to play out sexually. You're going to suppress your own sexual desires, you'll suppress your own sexual responses, you'll suppress your orgasm, you'll suppress your connection, the soul-based connection with another. So that's the consequence of shutting down the higher thing. Does that make sense? Yeah. So there's all these sort of penalties that come along when we do that we don't see as penalties. And so what do? So for that woman, she might go, I need to, get more stimulation, so I'll get a vibrator, or, it's hard for me to orgasm, so I'm going to do that. But the real problem is not sexual. The real problem is the suppression that's occurring emotionally that she's not resolving. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then that has a flow-on effect to the sexual area of life, naturally. And for a woman, it's probably more the case, because the woman has to be connected spiritually, and by the way, men do too, by the way, need to be connected spiritually, emotionally, in order to have good sexual response that's in harmony with love. Most men are not connected spiritually and not connected emotionally, and trying to use sex to compensate for these lack of connections in other areas. So that's why they turn to things like porn and other things like that, pornography, and wanting to have lots of different relationships and all these things. They're all caused by the higher things in the hierarchy being suppressed, which has a net effect on the lower things in the hierarchy. Make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if we start to develop an awareness of our sin in the spiritual aspects of our life and in the emotional aspects of our life, then the sexual aspects and the physical aspects of our life will naturally change. Right? And when these two things don't change, it's because we're not doing this. We're not focusing on where our sin is in the spiritual and emotional areas of our life. And that's why these things don't change. So it's a lot easier to solve your problems when you start seeing a lot of them as actually spiritual principles or emotional principles. Does that have a call?
Yeah. So I had about 40 years of attracting a very angry coworker, male.
Yep.
And I came upon divine truth in 2021 after I met my soulmate and we separated. So I was very motivated to change.
Mm-hmm.
So I used to get really panicky and afraid, and I lost many jobs because of it, because I would just get so scared.
Yeah.
Then I went into anger, and I thought that was good, but I learned from you about owning it instead of projecting it, and how I was doing that to protect myself, but that was a sin.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really, really helpful.
Yeah.
And the next thing that you and Mary talked about was the terror and the fear under that anger.
Yep.
This was life-changing for me.
Mm-hmm.
I went in to this guy that I would normally project anger, and I got really still, and my whole body started shaking.
Yeah.
And I was terrified. And I said, you know, the way you talk to me is just not okay.
Yeah.
And we had a heart-to-heart. He is a completely different person.
Yeah.
And I'm a completely different person. It transformed in ways I just couldn't imagine.
Yeah.
So I'm very,
Because
very
you let
grateful.
yourself feel your fear.
Yes.
And then you still took action.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's a process
Yeah.
that I kept saying, okay, I'm watching this.
Yeah.
And I'd have to watch videos and all kinds of stuff, and then practice, and then go in and little by little over weeks, it was a real progression.
Yeah.
And so meeting your soulmate is motivating. I'm still wondering why I'm in separation.
Yeah. Have you met your soulmate?
2021.
How do you know?
How do I know?
Yep.
There was a magnetism that was tangible that I understand could be wounds.
And spirit influenced?
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, I would be grateful if I didn't meet my soulmate in some ways. But there's so many things
I
that
don't
have
understand why
happened.
you'd be grateful about that either. Yep.
I believe he is because of the things that have happened, the coming together, the separating, me being very motivated to become more loving, to learn about love, to be more humble. I didn't have that ability before.
Yep.
And I still have a long way to go, I realize, but it just completely made me willing. And then the relationship with God. Go ahead.
I just been standing here feeling like there's something though about sin, and so this includes you, but I want to talk to everyone before you get into this. A lot of the women in the audience, you have this very strong idea of where you're at spiritually and emotionally.
Yep.
It's very strong.
And
Nearly
very
every
arrogant,
woman
actually.
who's spoken is very arrogant about it.
Yep.
And it's not a humble place. You're breaking a lot of spiritual laws. You're not coming here sort of seeking, and obviously not in your lives seeking the truth about these things. You've decided where you are, and it's a point of arrogance that God is going to be trying to correct with you a lot.
Yeah.
But it is very marked. It's quite strong.
Yeah.
Yeah, in this audience.
Why does it exist?
This is the question to answer. Because it's actually, you know, when you were talking about the sins you're aware of versus the sins you're not aware of, it's something that you're not aware of. So you're quite invested in holding on to it. but why is the question, is the end, yeah.
I resonate with what you're saying.
Yes.
And I think the why I can feel is terror and
Well, it's not terror, because if it was terror, you'd just feel your terror and you wouldn't be invested in the
Correct.
arrogance. So you might have some terror about giving up the arrogance, but you're not humble to that.
okay.
Yeah.
Desire for control.
Yes.
Bingo!
Why do you want
Defense.
Yeah.
Well, in my case, I got home last night, and that's what I was doing my homework, and I could feel I control everything. It's the harsh word, but how it feels to me, and I actually like this part of myself.
Yeah.
But I can feel it's like a worry, but it's soft and subtle, and I control everything to organize and order everything, and I get everything done, and I like it, and I feel good, and people around me like, I could do all your admin, like I have these skills.
No, you couldn't.
You couldn't.
Well, I know, but that's the arrogance.
That's the arrogance.
Yeah.
This is where we
can
think
do all this.
our sins are actually good things about us.
Yes.
This is the hardest one.
This is
to
what
give
I
up.
see. It's like, wait a minute, I think that's sin, but I like that about myself. I thought that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Even though I can see it's sin, I still have this attachment to it.
Emotionally, yes.
Emotionally, yeah.
Correct.
Like there's something in there that's
Correct.
So
like
that's
fighting for itself. Like, wait a minute.
Yes.
But why do women generally have this attitude that they know about emotion and they know how they feel and they get it better than men do? So why? See, obviously men have developed superiority in different areas of life, haven't they? So, particularly when it comes to using their hands and doing physical
intellect,
things.
physical things. A lot of men have
feel this is my domain. Right?
I'm more logical than women.
Yeah, all that. But then on the other hand, a lot of women feel, well, that's all true about these guys, but we're actually better than that because we get things. We understand what's going down. They got no clue
They're
what's
really
going on,
just
really.
big babies they don't know anything. They just need a mummy. Yeah.
That's all they really are. And so a lot of women have this attitude, we get it better. We understand the spiritual things and the emotional things, which are the more important things of life, better than the men do. There is this general feeling. You don't need to go. I know many of you feel this, right? But what it does is it creates a level of arrogance where you believe yourself to be somewhere where you're not.
And that's the danger that I feel for you, is just be...
So you meet a guy, he's my soulmate. I can feel it, he's my soulmate. But there are a whole heap of things you're going to have to do and understand about yourself before you're going to know who your soulmate is. And it's not going to be meeting the guy and knowing he's your soulmate until you've gone through those things about self-discovery, discovering yourself. Now you barely understand yourself at this stage. You think you do, but you don't, right? Now you barely understand your passion, your desires, what your main purpose in life is. You're yet to really discover it, and you're yet to even follow it, and so you're not in a state where you really understand yourself yet. Now, how can you recognise the other half of yourself when you don't understand yourself? It's impossible, actually. This is why the average person meets their soulmate in the fifth sphere of the spirit world. Because by the time they progress to the fifth sphere, they have a fair portion of understanding of themselves, which they don't have in the lower condition. When you're in a sin-based condition, you barely understand yourself at all. Most of what you feel is based upon your sin. So when attraction occurs when you're in a state of sin, so here's my sin, and let's say the sin dictates that here I am, here's my half of the soul, and here's somebody else's half of somebody else's soul. Right? Your attraction is?
Men.
Men,
Yeah.
yes. sexual attraction. So you at least know that about yourself. That's a good start. Some people on earth now don't even know that.
I know it.
A lot of people don't even know that. There's all this confusion.
Yeah.
They don't even know what their other half attraction is. That's how disconnected they are from themselves, right? But you at least know that. You at least know your other half is a male, right? But while there's a whole heap of addictions inside of you, and particularly towards the opposite gender, and also a lot of consideration towards the same gender, so if we look at gender issues, you've got gender issues regarding the opposite gender and the same gender as yourself, right? The opposite gender issues come with your dad, and the same gender issues come with your mum, and then how you've developed over time. And those issues won't be resolved in your sin until you've probably reached the 5th sphere of the spirit world. Right? Until then, you'll be in addiction with those gender-based issues. So when you feel a strong attraction in that state to another, what's the attraction caused by?
Injury.
Well, largely it's going to be addiction. And then whatever things you're trying to avoid, spirits can come along and give you messages about too, can't they?
Mm-hmm.
So they can even tee up. They go, what a lot of spirits do, a lot of you have gone to mediums and they said, oh, your soulmate's such and such somewhere, I think it's this person here. What they do is all they do is they look at all your injuries and they go looking for another person in your life, trying to find the person in your life that matches all your injuries. And then they tell you, oh, we found him. And you just got to discover him. He's somewhere in Timbuktu, you know. You just got to find him, right? And really all they've done is they don't believe in soulmates at all, most of these spirits. They don't even know what a soulmate is. They think a soulmate is a person who meets all your addictions, right? Which is what the average person on earth believes as well. A soulmate is a person who meets all my addictions. And so now, if this person, you will actually feel a strong attraction to a person that meets the majority of your addictions. You will open up emotionally, sexually, towards a person who meets the majority of your addictions, because that's the injury will determine the fact that you open up on that basis. Now there's a feeling of strong attraction, which a person says, then goes, he's my soulmate or she's my soulmate, without understanding what the attraction has been caused by at all.
And the danger, the reason why we jump on the statement a bit is because
which we have done with a lot of people.
With a lot of
I'm
people.
totally open to
Yeah.
it.
But you're going.
But it's,
As open as I can be.
You're very fixed on this guy being a soulmate.
I am.
Yeah.
I am.
So you're not totally
so
open
just
to
be
it.
honest about that.
Let's be
I
honest.
am honest.
Yeah, but the danger of fixating on someone as your soulmate when you're in this state is that
not having resolved the opposite and same gender issues that you have as sins within.
Yeah.
He hasn't either.
And he has either, by the way.
No.
So yeah, you're more willing to see that in him. Yeah, but anyway.
In fact, in your arrogance, you're saying it is all him.
Totally.
And this is why, what can I do to influence him to see that I'm his soulmate?
Yes. The danger
is the question
of
you basically
using
asked.
the soulmate
Yeah.
card,
Yeah.
if you like, is that it helps you to skip over this very important work, because you say, no, my attraction is based on the soulmate, the soul attraction.
Yeah.
Not on any of these things. When really, if you're going to discover whether or not he is, you have to do this work on these things. But when you fixate, he's my soulmate, then you're like, no, everything I feel is clearly legitimate because he's my soulmate.
And also, when we get together, all of my problems will be fixed.
Yes.
No, I don't feel that.
Well, you got together and it didn't fix everything.
Sure didn't.
But
You only feel that now. You felt that before.
yes,
Yeah.
when the initial
Yeah.
attraction happens.
Yes.
And this we see a lot of people actually enter abuse of a partner actually through this soulmate,
Influencing their free will,
saying-
pushing them around.
saying you should be with me because it's God said it, and they sort of taken license where they don't yet have the development.
Mm-hmm.
And it can cause you to skip over these things that you need to work on because they're in you, and you think, no, all of my attraction is legitimate because he's my soulmate, when actually I'm with my soulmate. There's still refinement happening in this attraction. There's still things that I'm dealing with that are my addictions, my opposite gender, all of that stuff. Just because you're with your soulmate doesn't mean that there aren't going to be things that you realise, oh, I've got to give that up actually. But when you get very fixated, this person is my soulmate, God said it, boom.
And it's not God, by the way, it's spirits.
That's right.
God never tells you.
It can be a vehicle for more addiction. Yeah. So you got to be just.
Can I just say
not
that again?
arrogant.
God never tells you who's
Yeah, did I say God told me?
No.
No.
Okay.
A lot of people think.
But by saying he's my soulmate, it's
Yes.
really saying God created us as one soul before you actually know it.
I did feel that way, absolutely. And I've been repulsed by other men, a lot of the things that you've talked about, but that could be spirit influence, right?
But not only that, the addictions you have don't match their addictions.
Uh-huh.
So you're repulsed.
Yeah.
You don't like them, right? You need to get to a stage where every single man you meet, but to meet your soulmate, you're going to get to a stage where every single man you meet, you can feel him, you can feel what his state is, you can feel his condition, and you love him.
Yeah.
And I don't mean you sexually love him, I mean
Yeah.
you love him, like, what can I do with this man? I can feel where he's at, what can I do with this man to help him out? In any of my interactions with him, you won't feel repulsed.
No.
The fact that you feel repulsed is proof that you got more to do.
I don't disagree, but I mean more repulsed in thinking of being sexually with somebody else.
I understand that.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it is an important point you made. Like Jesus, if anyone spends any time with Jesus, you can feel his fidelity to me.
Yeah.
It's very clear. As a woman, you can feel he's not interested in you sexually, but you can feel he's interested in you.
Right.
You can feel his kindness and his regard. So unless as a woman you are like that with men, where you feel a kindness and regard and an interest in and your attraction is to men, then you've got work to do. You've got work to do. Yeah.
Thank you.
And one other thing must be said, you're still in that state of arrogance that Mary's mentioned.
Yeah.
Still in
I
it,
can
right?
feel it.
Right now.
Yeah,
Like so.
I can feel it.
Yeah, and so there's one thing I must raise with you about it, and this is something general to consider about that arrogance. It's not a state of humility. You can't hear God's voice in that place.
Mhm.
You're only hearing your own. That's all you're hearing. And you can't even hear somebody else's voice in that place, really. All you're hearing is your own voice. And it's easy for you in that place to set up a self-delusion. Very easy. Yeah. And also very easy for a spirit who's happy for you to be in a self-delusion to come and influence you along the lines of your delusion. Right? So let's say there's a spirit who would like to see the two of you getting together sexually. Right? That spirit might be the person you're actually feeling. A woman spirit with you who likes the look of him and wants to engage with him sexually and wants to do it through you. And you will feel very strongly motivated to do the same thing with that belief. And so it's so easy to influence you then to have sex with this guy, right? Only to find out there's bigger problems and you shouldn't have started a relationship yet with him until you knew what they were. Right? But that spirit's going, but I should have it, I want that person still. And at this stage, you don't know that that's not what's happening to you. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And the state of arrogance is saying, that's not happening to me.
Yeah.
That's not true, it's my feelings, right? And this is where you're going to be so careful presuming specific things about your development, as Mary pointed out. You follow? Yeah.
So the work you do on feeling your fear and having your feelings, that's all good as long as it's not feeding an arrogance in you about your condition. And I'm saying that to everyone.
Yeah.
Could you repeat it, please?
Yeah, so sometimes we feel motivated towards an outcome. Say, I want to be with this man. I'm going to feel some feelings, and you might actually feel some things, and you might, you might see some benefit. But if you then use that to feed in an arrogance about your condition, about you've got it figured out, you've got it all now, you know how this thing works, that's going to be to your detriment. You know, this is a lifelong learning, if you like, with God. And so you just be very careful, be very mindful of this temptation to sort of, having got it, to give you a sense of control or give you a sense of managing your fear about what might happen next, or managing how you feel between the genders. Often when you start to open up emotionally, there's a lot of stuff about the opposite gender, and there's a temptation in a lot of women to sort of go, I've got it sorted.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a way of trying to manage.
And why doesn't the guy get on the same page?
Yeah. Yep. And
He's just not on the same page as me. He's clueless.
Not having.
he's just not on the same page as me, which is the feeling you actually have.
My coworkers helped a lot because when I still notice, even though things are 90% better or whatever, that I still have panic when he doesn't approve of something.
Yeah.
And I go, okay, I have more work to do.
Yeah.
And then I want to go into arrogance or anger or denial and say, oh, it's not bothering me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I go home and I'm like, that's bothering me.
I'm upset about it.
Thank you
that's
so
more
much.
honest. That's more
Thank
honest.
you.
But it requires, it's very important to, with every personal belief you have, to recognise that tomorrow you may have to change it.
Yeah.
When you are latched on, you're not having that level of humility. That tomorrow you may have to change it.
Great point.
Do you follow me?
Great point.
So when you're humble, one of the things you feel is that every single thing you currently think you know probably is wrong.
Or at least needs adjustment.
Or at least will need
It's going to need to be refined.
Yeah. And when you have the attitude, no, I'm pretty firm that this is right, and it's not confirmed by God, by the way, right? Because it's easy for someone else to ask and see whether it is, right? And it's not, right? So, and I'm not saying that, as I just said earlier, God's not going to confirm it either, because substantially He wants you to go through a process to feel who your soulmate is in the end. He needs you to go through the process of growth where you get to the condition of love, like in the fifth sphere, where you're starting to work and you've worked through most of your intergender issues. That means all your issues with your dad, all your issues with your mum, all your image issues about what it means to be a woman, all your image issues about what it means to be a man, all your role issues about what it means to be a woman, all your role issues about what you expect from the man. All of those things will need to be addressed in order for you to know who the other half is. Yep. And without that, you will not know. Yep.
Now, I reckon that's pretty exhaustive with soulmates. So, this is a rabbit hole that comes up a lot.
Which we can dive down, but we get off topic.
We can. Yeah.
Because the problem with focusing on soulmates when you're not dealt with your sin, there's a big problem.
And so I sort of feel like it's all, we're speaking in principles and generalities, but unless you're engaged with your own sin and the discovery of the personality that God created in you, it's really not where you're at yet. Does that make sense?
No.
Yeah. And if you're in a relationship, the loving thing to do is uphold all of God's principles with yourself in the relationship, and things will happen.
Things will work out.
Things will work out, you know. But it's not. You can't put the cart before the horse, if you like.
Yeah.
You know?
What many of you are trying to do is go, I want my soulmate now. If I get my soulmate now, then there's a whole lot of sin I won't have to feel about.
Guys, it's so untrue. It's so untrue. Just like, can we just blow that up as an idea? It's not true. You can meet your soulmate.
He'll make my whole life calm down. Or she will, you know.
Yeah.
It's the same for many men. She will make my whole life calm down. It's going to be a lot better. Isn't it going to be wonderful? If you stay lovey-dovey with each other, we'll be in a state of bliss. And yet all the sin is still there. So how can bliss come about while the sin remains?
Addictions.
It's absolutely impossible for it to be real.
Yeah, it can only be
It
short-lived.
can only be
addictive.
facade and based on addiction. Yeah. And if the sin remains, how can bliss actually occur? If bliss is an aspect of love, which it is, how can bliss occur if sin still remains? This is why most people don't realise, but dealing with your sin is really everything about your future. It affects every aspect of your future. It affects your work choices, your life choices, your partner, your children, your friends, your mother and father, whether they're here or in the spirit world. It makes no difference. It's going to affect every relationship you have, and every person who's involved with your life in some way or other expects you to sin the way you're currently sinning.
Yeah, true.
Every person. They expect you to sin the way they're used to with you.
Yeah.
And if they're not used to it, they're not in your life.
Right.
Because they avoid you if they're not used to it.
Or if they don't like it, then they're not
If they're
around
not,
you.
they're not going to be around you if they don't like it. So they like the way you sin. So unless you've gone through the process of almost every relationship in your entire life having some level of upheaval, you haven't dealt with hardly any sin at all. Because every single person in your life expects you to sin the way you currently do. Right? Can you see how that works? You can sort of see it, can't you? That if I have children and I have Mary and I have my mum and dad and I have my workmates and my work colleagues and I have my business and I have all these other things going on in my life, the people that are attracted to me are used to me being the way I am right now. Right? Right now. And they're okay with it. They're okay with it. If they weren't okay with it, they would have got out of my life by now. So they're all okay with it. So let's say I start changing. Who's going to be okay with it? Not a single person I know, probably, is going to be okay with it.
If you're lucky, some
Maybe
people
one
will say,
or two.
oh, yes, it seems like you're doing something good
Yeah,
for yourself.
initially.
You know? Yeah.
After time, they may come to see that you've made improvements. But only if they're prepared to deal with their addiction with you,
Yeah.
which they all have,
Yeah.
because you had addictions with them, and they have addictions with you. That's what bound you before. So unless that upheaval has occurred, it's a total sign that nothing much has been dealt with. Does that make sense? Now, there are very rare occasions where two people, and if you're in this position where both of you are listening to divine truth and you're in partnership, this is a very rare thing, right? And that both of you progress the same speed is almost impossible, actually, right? In terms of what each person is going to need to deal with in their life. But it's a very rare thing if that happens, and good on you if that's happened, but I'd be suspicious of it. Do you follow me? There must have to be, isn't there, even in a partnership where both of you are interested in divine truth, even then, if both of you get along fine and you're not, and nothing much is really changing in your relationship, then it means both of you are just as stagnant as each other, right? And you're just trying to work on other things, the things that don't affect your relationship one way or the other, right? Right? So there will be conflict. Get used to it. There will be, because the sin that's in you matches the sin in everyone around you. There's an attraction between your sin and theirs. You follow? And this is what pulls people in your life when you're in a state of sin yourself, is that it pulls people into your life who agree with your sins. Now, that doesn't mean they have the same sins as you. They could have completely opposite ones. So, example, I could think that women should care for the man by cooking and cleaning and giving him sex whenever he wants. That's love to me. That's what I think. And Mary could think her loving a man is all about cooking and cleaning for him and giving him sex whenever he wants.
That's gonna work out.
Now we've got two totally opposite views now. She's got the view that as a woman she's almost neglecting herself completely, but she's okay to not neglect me physically or sexually, right? And I've got the view she should do that. So rather than thinking, actually, Mary, that wouldn't be good for you, I'm going, that's great. It's good for me. So it's good. So we've got two completely, what really are opposite views in the sense of, good for Mary versus good for me. It's not good for Mary to have that view, but it's fine for me that she has it, right? But because we are in agreement that that's what love is between a man and a woman, we'll stay together happily, married for 25, 50 years.
Everyone will
Isn't
say,
it
what a great
wonderful?
marriage they have.
What a great marriage they have. And it's all crap. Right? It is. It's all crap because I am treating her as if she's my servant, not as if she's my equal. I'm not cooking and cleaning for her as much as she cooks and cleans for me. Right? Therefore, I'm not treating her as my equal. Right? I am unloving to her. And she's okay with it, which is a problem. Why would you be okay with being treated unlovingly? That's a problem too. And why would I even think that it's okay treating her unlovingly in this manner? That she's there to serve me. That's unloving on my part. And the trouble is, this marriage from the outside may look fine, but it's not fine from God's perspective. From God's perspective, it's all based on sin. And the only reason why it seems to work is because our sins have a level of agreement. Now, as soon as Mary decides, I've had enough of this, I've had enough of him just asking me for sex whenever, even if I'm not feeling good or whatever, I've had enough of him, coming home and expecting me cooked after every time he comes home. I've had enough of tidying up all of his laundry all the time. I've had enough of this, and she starts to stand up and say, look, this is not love. I'm going to have a meltdown. I'm going to go, this is not love. Like, that's what my mum did for me. My mum loves me more than you do. Right? Because that's what she would do, without the sex, right? But that's what she would do, right? I'm God in this family. What are you doing now? You're treating me like I'm equal. There's something wrong with that now. That's what I would think. They're treating me like I'm equal. That's a put down, is what I would think. And so there's going to be conflict. Does that make sense? Now, how you deal with that conflict, well, that's going to be a choice to be loving in every circumstance, isn't it? That will need to be dealt with. But even if I am loving, or Mary is loving in every circumstance with me, it still may end up with us breaking up. Because if I hold on to this unloving idea that the woman is there to serve me in all of these different ways, and she's not my equal, and I hold on to it, and I feel that in my heart that I want to hold on to that, and I want to fight for that, now there's going to be conflict for the rest of our lives. That's not good for any relationship, right? So Mary, if she loved herself, under those circumstances, she'd have to leave. I wanted to stay, but I wanted to be different. I wanted to go back. I'll say to her things like, when we have a bit of intimacy, I'll go, babe, you've changed. You don't realise that this divine truth thing has made you a much harsher woman. You don't love me the way you used to anymore. Can't you see that? Can't you see that this Jesus character, he's misled you? And if the woman is sensitive to all of that manipulation, then she may respond to that. But at the end of the day, none of it's true. It's all, as soon as you change an addiction in you, everyone who was dependent upon that addiction being in you is going to be upset with you for changing that addiction. Everyone. And it's going to be your kids and your parents and your family and your sisters and your brothers and your workmates and your colleagues and they're all going to be upset because they're no longer getting what they believed you to be, which was really your addiction. They're no longer getting that from you, and they're all disappointed. And instead of feeling disappointed and looking at themselves and going, maybe, like in the case of me with Mary, maybe me, Mary cooking and cleaning up after me for 30 years of her life, maybe that was me not being loving, right? Instead of me doing that, so that's what I would do if I had any level of sincerity at all, right? If Mary had said something. But instead of me doing that, I'd go, oh, she doesn't love me anymore. Oh, let's go and have an affair. I'll find a woman who will do those things. Yeah. And this is how many people react, right? If you react that way, it's obvious that you're not sincere about love, right? But most of us aren't sincere about love. And God can't change your sincerity about love, and neither can your partner. Neither can your closest friends. The only person that can change your sincerity is me, isn't it? My sincerity, it's me. I own it. I'm the one that's going to have to change it. And if Mary needs to change hers, that's all she's responsible for. She's not responsible for changing mine. Right? She's only responsible for changing hers. So it's great she draws a line in the sand and says, matey, you're being unloving when you expect me to cook and clean and do all those other things for you. Right? And she draws a line in the sand and I go, but I want to step over that line. And while I don't see myself clearly, I'll be making that decision over and over and over again. And then, of course, that forces Mary into making a decision, doesn't it, about my behaviour. So if I refuse to be sincere, now Mary's own sincerity is going to drive future further decisions that she's going to have to make if she's in harmony with love of self, and she's going to have to make if she's in harmony with God's love. She's going to have to make those decisions, right, to stay connected to God and herself. She's going to have to do it. And what happens between us is now really, to a large extent, up to me and my own sincerity. Right? If I remain insincere, we're done. That's how it's going to be. Because Mary, in a state of love of herself and love of God, is not going to allow this behaviour anymore. Done. Right? That's how it should be firm. It's not happening anymore. And then my response will be up to me. My free will choices, my sin, my willingness to be sincere about my sin. You know, and if I really cared about Mary, I'd do that, wouldn't I? I'd go, yeah, you're right, darling. No, I can't understand how for 30 years I've expected this from you. You know? This is not, unfortunately, what happens in most relationships. What happens in most relationships is one person does something till they're almost dead and then can't do it anymore because of some physical infirmity, and then the other person starts doing it. Right? If it takes Mary almost on her deathbed before I take an action that's loving, how loving am I really?
Right. Yeah.
I am like next to zero love in me, right? If I'm waiting until Mary dies doing what she's doing in order to serve me, right? If I observe her being unloving to herself day after day after day, and I don't even see it, how unloving am I? I've got to be pretty unloving to do that. You follow? Yeah.
Question about the conscience in relation to soulmates. Will the conscience never work for that question?
No. God wants you first to discover you. When you discover you, then you will automatically, as soon as you meet your mate, you will automatically know who they are. You will. Yeah. You won't need to be told. And in fact, if God tried to tell you, you wouldn't even need God to tell you. So anytime you're asking before then, it's because of an addiction.
And you wouldn't doubt it at all. If somebody asks you a question, you wouldn't doubt it. You'll just know it's you.
If you're in the state like this, so you get to develop yourself to where you get rid of these intergender emotional issues and you develop you to the point where you're in the fifth sphere, nobody needs to tell you. Now, it's interesting because you can actually discover who your soulmate is as spirit without doing that. Right? But it's not in your best interest, or theirs probably, to know. And the reason why that is the case is because frequently a person who's shown the way to discover who their soulmate is, and they discover it, they get together instantly, they have a big fling, and then there's a lot of very hard emotions that start coming up, which they haven't dealt with, relating to their father and their mother and their gender issues and everything else. And the average person at that point goes into a meltdown. And such a meltdown that they reject their mate, and they reject them for much longer than they would have otherwise, because of the rage and the other feelings they have, right? And so oftentimes it leads to, like, soulmates could get together early. God designed it so that soulmates should get together by the time you're in your 20s. You would know who your soulmate is and all that stuff. God's designed it so that most children would know by the age of 7, actually. But unfortunately, because of the injuries, that doesn't happen generally on Earth at all, even though the soulmates are often born in the similar vicinity. They're often born within, like I said to, what was a group in Canada, within 50 to 100 k's of kilometres, 1,500 miles of each other. They're often born, apart, and yet the average person, and the average person even meets them frequently, but still doesn't know who they are. Yeah. If you do, well, that's good, but I would question, are these things dealt with? Right? Because if they're not, you are very prone to error on the issue. And if you have a demanding view towards the partner, the person you believe is your soulmate, for him to get on board, or she get on board, which we know many people have done, then that is a very unloving thing to do to another person, right? To go up to them, you're my soulmate, we're going to get together. And in fact, the majority of people would be repulsed by that action because their free will is not involved, right? Naturally, they'd find it repulsive. It's not the way to handle your soulmate, even if you know who they are. Yeah? So, where all of you are actually at the moment, forget about your soulmate for a bit. Focus on dealing with your sin first. You deal with your sin, it'll become naturally apparent to you who the other half is, because you have discovered who you are. Does that make sense? And if you're in a partnership, don't break up just because you don't know whether you're soulmates or not. Work through your issues, right? Don't avoid working through the issue. If you're not in a partnership, get some opposite gender friends. If your attraction is the opposite gender, get some opposite gender friends, and hopefully ones who will work through some issues. Right? And I don't mean have sex with them, I mean work through the issues. What do you feel about the opposite gender? Why, what I feel from most of you women in the audience is you have no interest in men at all. There's a couple who do, but the majority of you do not. Right? Now, given the fact that the majority of you your soulmates are male, that's going to be a problem. Yeah? It's going to be a problem for your future. Work through those issues. Work through the sins. Because they're all sins, right? Yeah. Time. Half an hour to go. Good day.
Right. This goes back to the spiritual principles.
Great. Thank you.
The one of abundance.
Yep.
That probably uses all of those.
Well, yeah, I haven't talked enough about money, have we?
That's what I was gonna ask about, like how do you?
You notice most of you sort of
interface-
avoided that subject.
Yeah, this is one I really want assistance with because I'm using it all the time
Yeah,
and there's a feeling of lack that I
Yeah.
know is a sin.
Yeah.
Because it's not recognizing in my feelings
abundance.
abundance.
And also it creates a lot of actions which are taken
Yes.
to save money
Yes.
only,
And that are sinful.
that are simple, yeah.
Yes, and so the main sin is the spiritual principle that I don't actually feel in my soul
Yep.
is true.
Well, it's also, isn't it, too, it's linked to a trust in God as well, isn't it,
Yes.
and God's nature. It's sort of like, you're almost saying, well, you know, God hasn't provided enough,
Yes,
so I've got to now,
not in this area of
not in
life.
this area, yeah.
Okay, so God I might feel God provides in other areas that are abundant, but not in this area of money, because money is man-made. So
Yeah, but
God's
it's
laws don't
necessary with
apply.
life on earth, isn't it, at the moment, the way the system is built.
Yeah.
So, not having enough, surely God would feel you not having enough is not good.
Also, it would lack self-responsibility, so I would be breaking a law of the principle of self-responsibility, feeling like I don't have enough money, because then I'm not generous, I don't.
True.
Yeah, so
True.
let's just tidy up what you're saying
Some
a
of
bit
the
there.
logic,
Yeah, because it is possible to not have enough money. It's possible, isn't it, to not have enough money to feed yourself and what have you. So it's not
There's
that
many people in the world who don't have
who
enough
don't
money.
have that, and it's not their sin is not believing, oh, I don't have enough money, or they often they're at the mercy of other people's free will choices.
Other people's addiction to money.
Yes, and that's mostly, I feel, people in the United States of America, I mean, we kind
Well,
of
in the
control
Western
that.
world, should we say?
Yeah.
You know, in
Western.
Europe, we're here, England, Australia, New Zealand, all the sort of Western countries, the westernised countries, these are more focused on money than anything else, and also more focused on taking from resources from other countries so that their own addictions for money and power and comfort are fed.
Yeah, I would say the problem is that most people in the West are willing to break spiritual principles in order to get, save, or multiply their money.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's really not about money, it's about the spiritual principles. So it's, and in a very micro example, it's going to the store and buying something that is of less quality, is less economical, all of those things because it costs less. Then I've broken a bunch of spiritual principles about function and economy and all of those things because of my sin around money. So really, if I upheld the other spiritual principles, money wouldn't be my top priority. It would be
Way down, way down.
like deep down.
Zero almost.
Yeah, yeah.
You won't even, if you have the right, attitude towards it, you'll barely think about it, with the exception. And when I say barely think about it, I don't mean that you're irresponsible with
No,
it.
right, yeah.
You understand? There's a big difference between not thinking about it all the time and then being responsible or irresponsible with the use of it.
Because it's loving to know
To be
how much
very
money you
responsible.
have and
Yeah.
to know how you use it and
Yeah.
Not overspend.
yeah, you will use it in harmony with the principles,
Yeah.
and don't get into debt that you can't pay.
Get out of
Yeah,
all that fun stuff. Very responsible. Like, self-responsibility demands that you know your exact financial position every day.
Yes. I had a added, I guess, problem with it, which relates to, I think, the law of desire, or where, like, if my desire is something that the world does not view, does not have any value for.
Yeah.
Okay, so like raising children, or
Yeah.
something that doesn't have a
Well, the
monetary
world has a big value placed on raising children.
I know, but no monetary value.
you don't necessarily get paid for it.
Yes.
Yeah, but I don't agree with that statement really either. Most women's work are totally involved around raising children. So it's half of the population of the world views raising children as a huge source of worth, wealth, and all sorts of other things. Because without the children, who's going to look after you in your old age? And there's a lot of those kind of attitudes on earth too. So I don't know if I'd agree with many of those statements. They're quite sort of illogical in a lot of ways.
Okay.
But let's drill down to what is logical. Mary raised 3 issues. Firstly, getting it, acquiring it,
Yes.
saving it, and then multiplying it, or trying to make your money get bigger without you having to do much work to get bigger.
Okay.
Right? These are 3 big areas of problems with money. Firstly, getting it. If you're willing to compromise spiritual principles in order to get money, you're going to break a lot of laws. So a good spiritual principle is, what about others who don't have money? Am I going to care for them? What about, do I give money to people who are unwilling to work? Can you see, if I'm prepared to give money to people who are unwilling to work, can you see I might be creating more of a problem for them? Right? So it's whether they're willing to work versus whether they're unable to work, isn't it, as well? But in terms of acquiring money, how I acquire money must be governed by love-based principles. So in other words, if I'm acquiring money by doing something that's damaging to the environment, if I'm acquiring money by taking actions to, feed the world, but in a manner that's out of harmony with principles of love of animals and love of the environment. If I'm acquiring money in a manner that doesn't benefit other people while I'm acquiring it. So an example of that is Facebook. Facebook feeds the addictions of people, and the people who own it have shares in it, are acquiring money from the addictions of people.
Yeah.
Very unloving thing to do. Right? That's not in harmony with love at all. Right? Owning shares in Facebook is completely out of harmony with love. Right? And obviously the same applies to Twitter. I don't know what all the other ones are, but they're all created to feed addictions. That's their purpose, to make people feel good about their addictions. A thing that's created just for the purpose of feeding addiction is not something you should be investing in from a point of view of love. Does that make sense?
Yes.
These companies should be worthless. They should be worth nothing. Nobody should be even using them. Do you know what I mean? Because they're all based about feeding addiction. Right? So their whole basis for their existence is sin. Right? Now, who owns the majority of Facebook? Is that Zuckerberg? Sorry about that, matey, but that's the truth. But, it's the way it is. It's sort of like acquiring funds by feeding your addictions is a very unloving thing for me to do. So in other words, if I notice you've got the addiction to feel good about yourself, and so what I'm going to do is make you feel good about yourself, and you'll pay me some things too, so that you can feel more good about yourself. And I just feed that addiction, and you pay me some more money, and I feed that addiction more, and you pay me. I'll end up being a very wealthy man, but you'll end up further in your addiction, and I've helped destroy your soul.
Yeah.
Right? It's very unloving on my part to do something like that. You follow? Now, that's an example of acquiring money at the cost of other people's lives. Not their physical life so much, but their spiritual life, their soul life. If I'm acquiring money to your detriment, so the same applies to if I'm a pornographer. If I'm a Twitter, Facebook, all those kind of things that all meet addiction. Influencer. I'm influencing you to purchase certain products, using my influence to make you feel cool if you get that product. I'm using your addictions. That's very different to me saying, this is a great product. I think, this is why it's great. That's very different to me trying to influence you and calling myself an influencer. Right? All of you influencers out there, you're all being unloving. Right? Why would you want to influence people to do things that you often know are not good for the environment or not good for the people who are buying them? It's only because you get money out of it. What about all the stuff to do with acquiring it through Bitcoin and all these digital currencies, right? Investing them on the stock market, right?
Multiplying no work, right?
It's multiplying your funds with the underlying goal for the majority. Like the majority of you are not buying something on the stock market because you like the company and you think you want to support it. You're buying it because you think it's going to grow and it'll give you back some money.
Right. Yeah.
That's unloving.
Yeah.
That's a sin. To get something for nothing is also a sin. Right? To get something for no action or loving action on your part is also a sin. So, I get money from drugs, sin. Right? Get money from pharmaceuticals, sin. There's so many sins getting committed because of how we acquire money. And because all of us go, but we need it to live. Well, there's a lot of really good things you can do that will help you acquire money that are loving. Really good things. You could work out some fantastic ways to fix the environment and you will get money from doing that. Each of you could just clean homes. You have a cleaning business. Yeah. You'll get plenty of money from that. You will. Because everybody needs a cleaner at some point. Right? You will. You will eventually get that. Garbage collector is a great job. Very, very ethical. Right? Because he's cleaning up the garbage, and it's a loving service. A person who's a farmer, it's a good thing. And not necessarily that he does it with meat, but it's a good thing that he's feeding the nation. And it will be a more ethical way of obtaining money, right? So what we've got to look at here is go, right, how am I acquiring it? Is it harmonious with love? Make sense? You got a question about it?
I do.
Yep.
Yeah. On this topic about getting money, I feel like I thought about this, but I feel like as I've reflected on it, every industry in this world is harmful to either people or the environment.
Well, I don't know if I'd agree with
Even
that.
a garbage collector is putting garbage into a landfill. It's being managed.
No. He's not putting garbage into a landfill. You are.
Is part of that system. That's
He's
true.
just allowing that service to occur, but it's more loving for him to do that than it is to create the plastic in the first place.
Right. That's still in harmony with the spiritual principle.
Well, it's still he's wanting to be of service to you, right? Which is certainly a loving act, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Wanting to be of service. He wants to get rid of your garbage. Now, of course, it'd be great if some scientists come up with different ways to get rid of garbage other than just dumping it in a landfill, right?
What about if that garbage collector is enabling the addiction of that person throwing out the garbage into the landfill?
Well,
Saw it as that.
now you're getting into very thin ice because you got your rubbish, you deal with it every day, and you're giving it to him every week to say that he's enabling you. That's pretty bad to say that. Because
You're an enabling guy.
you're on really thin ice there, right? Because actually, he's providing a service to you, right, that you want him to provide. So he's not enabling you. You've already enabled yourself. So take responsibility for that. Don't blame him for that. The fact that he's willing to do that service, which is not something many people are willing to do, is pretty good.
But in the place of the garbage collector, that's still just being in a humble service that.
Yes, but he could then go further, couldn't he? He could go, right, there's a lot of plastic coming here, how can I fix that? There's a lot of things happening here. He can take actions that are loving to help all of that process, but at the end of the day, he's got to educate you, doesn't he? take pictures of the big mounds in Florida
Yeah.
that are all getting created, mountains of garbage that are getting covered with landfill, and take pictures of all that and show you them and say, do you think this is great? And then maybe you'll change your consumption patterns and your desire for plastic and everything else. So that would also be a part of his actions, right? Potentially, if he was really loving, that's what he would do. But the average one of you don't like to hear all the truth about all that. You don't. And so the average person would criticise him for doing that. And he might even get the sack for doing that. Right?
And just, what is this? There's this theme keeps coming.
Yeah, there are other people
up.
who are blamed for my sin.
Yeah, other people blame for my sin, but also this other theme of like, well, everything's a sin then. Everything I do is a sin, every system's a sin, everything's a sin. It's all sin.
Yeah.
What?
It's true that there are a lot of things going on earth that are sins, but we can improve it.
We're coming, that's what we're saying, we're all coming from a place of sin. All these systems have sin.
Yeah.
But the temptation to sort of say, I've heard it from 3 different people now,
Yeah.
that, it's just all sin, maybe even 4. You got to be, what is the motivation for that statement? There's a lot in that actually, like
laziness.
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
I throw my hands up and you can't get anything perfect.
It's too big
so
a
don't
problem for
fix
me
anything.
to have personally be involved in.
It's the corrupt faith.
Sorry?
The corrupt faith.
Yes,
Yes,
the corrupt faith
yes.
being supported in a way. It's saying,
Yeah.
I shouldn't have to do all this work to resolve these problems. I shouldn't even have to think about it too much. Now you're making me think about a whole heap of things, but now that I think about it, it all looks like
feels
sin. And I
bad.
say, yes, it does.
Yes.
It is all sin for the large degree. What are you going to do about it? You go, but I don't want to do anything. Can I really do anything about it? I don't think I really
It won't
can.
be perfect if I do it, so therefore I won't do
So
anything.
therefore I won't.
And that's actually going to be counter to your progression.
Yeah.
As you progress, you're going to miss the mark, but you
Refine. You'll
get
refine.
closer, and then you miss the mark. You get closer. You get
Yeah.
closer. You get closer. You can't go from the state that we're in to just hit the mark
Instantaneous
of love
perfection.
for everything. You can't just hear it and go, there it is. Boom, I've done it.
Yeah.
That's not how sin works.
And
You've
also,
got to release it.
that
from
you don't learn anything about the effects of your sin if that happened anyway.
Yeah.
So you see, each of us must learn, for example, the effects of plastic on the planet. Many of you think you know, but you don't know. You really don't know. You're presuming, you get a little bit of media stuff about different things, but you don't know the full effects of it. When we were in Belgium, I put out a bowl, a stainless steel bowl, clean, out in the rain to see what kind of thing was coming along with my rainwater, right? It was full of black plastics
And particulates.
and
stuff,
particulates,
yeah, from the smoke.
right? And I'm looking at this, and I said to Mary, now I've got to put it through a filter to try and filter out all these particulates before I can even drink rainwater, that's coming from the sky. You think, that'd be pretty pure, but it's already gone. So most of us don't understand. We need to educate ourselves.
And
that's a process.
it's a process, so you're going to be in a process. And again, you're talking about something physical. Most of you have no clue how holding on to an intergender issue, how much that affects everyone around you, the earth, that way, our children, just holding on to resentment with your dad, how much that affects things.
Yeah.
Is a huge thing that you're going to need to learn about, and you will as you work through the sin.
How much your issues with money cause you to make a whole heap of bad decisions with regard to sin.
How much every expectation you have on any person, how much that's affecting things. And so it's a process of education. This dealing with your sin, gaining awareness, getting to awakening, is very instructive. You become very passionate about these topics because you have to go through a process of feeling
Not only passionate, but knowledgeable as well.
You'll be able to educate, you'll be able to spot things as they're happening, you can make corrections, but you can't do it overnight. And there is a process of having to deal with the feelings of, I am missing the mark of love. It doesn't feel good. I don't feel good about that, But that's part of you learning the power of your free will used out of harmony with love. You come to respect your free will really a lot, because you're like, wow, if I use this well, it can be so positive. If I use this out of harmony with love, I now know, having dealt with even one sin, I now know that every time I use it out of harmony with love, there's going to be so many effects of that.
Cascading
That,
effects. Yeah.
that it's just better to use it in harmony with love. I've got to learn the most I can about love and just be humble to this process of correction. So be very careful of this. Oh, it's all too much. If you feel that, then feel it. Cry about it. You know, let that out, because it is partly anger about having to face the mess that we're in as individuals and as a collective group of people on the earth right now.
Yeah, so say you need some water. The only water around you is in plastic bottles. What's the loving thing to do? You know,
Buy as big a bottle as you can. Yeah.
buy the biggest bottle you can.
Yeah.
Or
Because
Reuse.
it'll be the most, you know, if you need the water. And then reuse it. So when you've got the opportunity to fill it up from some source that's not in a bottle, then fill up the bottle again and fill it up again and fill it up again. So you're not single using the plastic. That's a more loving choice than just for a start going, oh, I'm going to not drink any water. Well, that's, 3 days of that. Good luck with your health, right? So that isn't a loving solution. Another option might be, I'm just going to find, I'll go to the next place, drive 100 kilometres to go to the next place to get the place that hasn't got a plastic bottle to get my water. But you've now just filled the ozone with all this carbon of 100 kilometres of your exhaust gases coming out of your vehicle. So that wasn't a very good solution either. And this is the trouble. When you're in a state of fear trying to fix a sin, you're just going to commit more, right? It's, as Mary pointed out, is a growth process where you become more sensitive to everything you do, and then you make adjustments based on that sensitivity that improves every state that you're in. So, for example, when we are home, we collect our own rainwater, we filter our own rainwater, we don't make anybody else responsible for that water, we drink that water, it's beautiful by the way, and we love it. Like, we hate travelling for that that's one reason why we hate travelling, is because everywhere we go the water's terrible, right? It's all, nowadays, in almost every country we've gone to, the only water that's been any good has been reverse osmosis water, which is like a huge process to go through to create reverse osmosis water, because most of the water is full of particulates and crap, and also companies are actually injecting carbonates into the water and selling carbonates as a part of the water to get rid of their carbon in your water. So you go to some countries, there's now like 300 parts per million, 400 parts per million of carbons in the water, so called to make it alkaline, but actually it's to get rid of their waste in your water, right? And so all these things need to change, but if you're not aware of it, you're not going to do anything to make the personal changes. And if enough people make the personal changes, then change is possible, right? You get to a point with the mass of people where the mass of people drives a new course of action if the mass is great enough, right? But that requires education on our part, right?
It seems, what I'm sort of taking away from today though, is that if I focus on my spiritual sins, like I know this is very helpful, right? If I focus on that and not focus so much on the physical stuff that we use as examples, because I think that is when sometimes it can feel overwhelming. Oh my God, toilet paper and pets, and I mean, good Lord, enough, right? But
modern life is like scary,
right?
When it comes to sin, right?
But I do feel, well, obviously you're speaking the truth, but I have experience just working on, like, say, equality.
Yep.
And you've said it. If I do the emotional work around feeling inferior or superior, and talk to God about it, and then it's, okay, am I being superior or being inferior? And allowing that love and that truth to transform that.
And go through the emotions
The
that cause
emotions,
you.
yes,
Be humble enough to go through the emotions that cause you to feel the way you do.
right,
Because are your sins.
right, the causing, right?
Yeah.
That seems a lot simpler.
It is.
It is.
That's
Yeah.
what we
I
recommend.
guess it's the law of economy going.
But you see, to become aware of the sin, we've got to present a whole heap of examples to you to show you
Yeah.
sinning is happening everywhere, like in so many different places of your life. It's everywhere, everywhere. And unless you become aware that it's everywhere, you're highly unlikely not going to do anything to change that.
Highly unlikely to do anything. There's a double negative in
Sorry.
there somewhere.
Yeah.
You're probably not going to change.
I said that. No, you're probably not going to change it. So it's because with all of these principles, if you can sort of go, oh, let's talk about love. Isn't it nice and furry and warm and fuzzy and wonderful, isn't it?
And we all love already, don't we?
We all love
We know
already,
how
don't we? Yeah, let's talk about love. But see, unless we highlight where love isn't, then how do you know what love is? Like, because a lot of times what you believe love to be is completely opposite to love. Like, for many of you, love is comfort. But many of your comforts are sins. Right? Now, God wants you to be comfortable. He doesn't want you to be forever in pain and suffering and discomfort. But there's loving ways to obtain comfort, and there's unloving ways to do it. And He wants you to realise, the way I'm doing it at the moment, there's so many unloving ways that I'm doing it. I could bring these into harmony with love, and then I wouldn't be sinning anymore with my comfort. You follow? And unless we're aware of all the things we do that are unloving and therefore sins, how are we going to become aware of, or desirous even, of changing them? So that's why we bring up examples. We don't bring up examples to torment you. We don't bring up examples to make your life so uncomfortable that you're barely able to function the next day. Because you go, I'll pick up my plastic thing and pour it in my plastic thing and put it in my plastic cup and put it in my, and then I'll put my plastic thing in the rubbish bin and how many times have I said now, that's not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to show you that unless we have a focus of understanding the spiritual principles involved in everything, we will not have a motivation to change any of that behaviour. And that's really what we need to do. We need to start wanting, developing a desire to change.
One of the biggest things that's really, correct me if I'm in a delusion here, but once I started hitting some repentance, and I'm not saying I fit all my repentance, I really got to because I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to keep hurting innocent people, particularly my children, which is where it started.
Yeah.
And it was so painful. And I thought,
But
wow,
powerful
I don't want to. I'm not saying I've perfected it, but that repentance, I would say, for me, has helped me the most.
Yeah, but be careful here.
Okay.
You can say, I don't want to do that thing anymore, but while at the same time not wanting to find out why you do that thing.
Okay.
So this is what we notice a lot, where people go, I recognise, I just treated my child badly. I don't want to do that anymore. God, please help me not do that anymore.
Right.
God's not listening to that. And the reason why God's not listening to that is because you haven't found the reason why you did it yet. And unless you find the reason why you do it, you're going to keep doing it until
feeling terrible.
You die. And even then you're going to keep doing it.
Can we pray and ask God to help us find the cause?
Of course.
That's okay.
He is so interested in helping you find the cause.
Okay.
But of course he's not going to overcome your will to find the cause or present it.
You've got to sincerely want
You've got to sincerely want that to know what the cause is. So yes, I yelled at my child yesterday, or I felt like clipping my child over the ear the day before. Why? Right? Most of us go, oh, isn't that terrible? I feel so guilty that I even felt that. It's so terrible. I don't want to do that anymore. And so then we enter an opposite state of permissiveness with our child, right? rather than correcting our own sin as to why we had the opposite feeling before then, right? And all we've done now is commit another sin of allowing a child to get away with everything, right? And this is what we often do when we're in this state, because we're not realising that to a large degree. It's just a lot of bugs coming in there. Yeah. And we're not realising to a large degree that most of our intellectual reactions to the consciousness of sin are going to be another sin. And so it's only when we actually get to the emotion of it and clear away the emotion that we start to see, that was a sin, like my feeling of wanting to smack my child, that was a sin. But my feeling of also wanting to be permissive with my child, that's a sin too. You need to be able to get to the stage where you realise what causes it, each thing. You follow? Yeah. And a lot of times what causes each thing are things you haven't healed in yourself, but sometimes they're things like where you haven't thought about it even, or you haven't even been consciously aware of what's going on. And there's all sorts of reasons that a lot of times you were indoctrinated in a path, you know, and you believe with all your mind and heart that that was right, and often it turns out to be wrong. And you've got to get to the stage where you want to know the cause. So don't just get stuck in this thing of, I realise that's a sin, I realise that's a sin, I'm going to stop that behaviour, I'm going to stop this behaviour, I'm going to stop doing that, without actually finding the reason. Yeah? Because it's the cause is the real sin.
But if you're repentant, isn't part of that, like if it's really emotional, you really feel, maybe what you're saying to me,
You can't be
doesn't
repentant.
mean you have found the cause?
No, you can't be repentant for something you don't know the cause of. Like, if you're asking God for forgiveness about something that causes you to sin, you've got to know what you're asking Him to forgive. Right? And asking Him to forgive the effect is not the sin. It's the effect of the sin. Right? So most of us get tied up in this place where we go, I sinned here and I sinned there. Please forgive me for sinning in that way. Please forgive me for sinning in this way. Instead of going, I need to know why I sinned the way I did, and then I can ask God to forgive that. Do you follow it?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like the driver of the sin. You've got to deal with the driver.
Yeah.
The driver. Does that make sense?
The
driver of the powerhouse. The
Yeah.
motor that's running.
Because it's the cause that motivates me to the sin. So unless I'm focusing on, here is my reason for sinning, and I need to pray about the reasons. So I need to awaken to the point where I know the reason. Right? And that's a different process than knowing the effect of the reason. Make sense? So an example of that before, when I'm treating Mary badly and I'm expecting her to cook and clean after me all the time, right, that's the effect of the sin. The reason for me doing that is some unloving spiritual principle inside of me that drives me to that action with her. Right? Now I can ask God, please, forgive my sin of treating Mary this way, which is really saying, please forgive the effect of the sin. Now God's not going to forgive the effect of the sin. Once a sin is established, the effects are undeniable. They are going to happen. The sin creates its effects, and the effects are the results of the cause. And so God can't rub out the effect because the effect's happening. That's showing you there must be a cause. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So what God does instead is, I'm waiting for you, Jesus, to understand why you treat Mary so badly. Mm-hmm. I need to know from you, Jesus, what you think or what you feel or what you've arrived at is the reason why you treat Mary badly. Mm-hmm. And then when I know that, and I'm sincere about that, and I think, oh, that's really bad, and I start awakening to it, now I can pray to God for forgiveness because I'm repentant for the thing that I did wrong.
So the sin is not expecting me to cook and clean and make the dinners.
That's the effect.
The sin is the emotional belief, the definition of love, probably in this case, that is flawed. That is the sin.
Inside of me.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's going to affect our life in many other ways, not just
cooking, cleaning.
Yeah.
Well, I know with my kids, for instance, I had a belief and a demand that they were there to love me, which of course isn't true. It's obviously the reverse. So a lot of codependent addiction, which I feel like I'm emotionally breaking through.
Yeah, it's not the reverse either, by the way, so. You're not there to love them either.
Oh, okay. I'm there to teach them? What?
To educate.
To educate them.
Oh, okay.
The whole reason why God created you having children is so that you have an older person who should be more educated, educating a child who is less educated.
And of course...
They're his children, not yours.
What I was going to say, the most important thing to educate them about is God's laws and God.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. But you are not there to love them.
Yeah, I hear you.
Right? A part of loving them, of course, is educating them, but your purpose in life isn't just to love them. It's to love everybody.
Well, yeah.
Not just them. This is a problem we have with our children. We start to view our children as more important than other people's children, and more important than ourselves, and more important than my relationship with my partner, and more important, I've got to run them around, loving them, taking them to, footy, what do you have, basketball, baseball, whatever, run them around doing all of these things, right? And I've got to run around satisfying all of their demands to the sacrifice of my own relationship with my partner. This is me being a good mother and being a good dad, and it's all crap. It's all because we're not educating our children in that place. We're actually teaching them things that are false. We're teaching them that a role of a parent is to be at the beck and call of our children, and that is not what God does with you. He doesn't say, "Oh, you want to go to soccer now? I'll take you there. You want to go to football now? Yeah, I'll take you there." He doesn't do any of that for you. He wants you to become self-responsible. And a part of loving your children is helping them become self-responsible as soon as possible. Yeah. By the time they're 5, self-responsible. Yeah. By the time they're 7, earning enough money to buy their own food and whatever. God wants them to be self-responsible people. He wants you to educate them how to be. Yeah?
Well, I missed that mark all the way.
Well, it's just another sin, right? But you can see that if you are bound by the feeling of, my role is not to be a mummy or a daddy, my role is to be an educator of my younger brother and sister, which I have had the privilege of creating the bodies of, the 2 bodies, which, by the way, I didn't really create, did I? All I had to do was sex with my partner, and God created the whole process that creates the bodies through that process. So that wasn't very hard on my part. It was a lot of design on God's part and very little design on my part, aside from the desire, of course. And if I understand that that is my role, and also understand the very little part I had in creating their bodies, then I would respect the fact that actually I'm in a custodial role with my children, and my responsibility is to find what the owner of the process designed for those children of his. And if I had that attitude, you can see my way I'd be bringing up my children would be completely different, wouldn't it? It's completely different. Yeah.
Yeah, just reflecting on the definition of sin and the sin effect. Like, I've been watching your videos for 12 years, and I finally understand. Most people, when they say sin, they're talking about the sinful effect or the sinful action.
Yes.
Exactly
right.
Exactly. Yeah.
Don't you love those moments, Scott?
Yeah. Light bulb.
The sin is the feeling inside of you that drives the action.
We've really got to represent this assistance group from 2019 because we
Yeah.
went into this a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was fun, wasn't it?
It
And
was,
It was good
Yeah.
material.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were so sad that all the audio got messed up because there was so good material, and I thought, I want to get this out. But to be honest, a lot of people who were listening even there at the time weren't ready to hear a lot of the information either. So I think as audiences around the world become more ready to hear about sin and ready to sort of...
You'll sort of be hungry for it. You're
Yeah,
like,
investigate.
more now.
Yeah. You got to be like a
I like
detective
with the flashlights.
looking at the forensic evidence.
In your own crime scene.
That's good.
Along with the yarn on every, showing every trail or every trace where it comes from, how they...
Yeah, you know.
Yeah, exactly. The
Right.
little red.
You get to the stage where you're very comfortable talking about it,
Yeah.
and instead of feeling like apprehensive or worried, you feel like more like, this is going to create a lot of freedom in my life if I can address this problem. You get to the stage where you sort of look forward to finding your next sin. Sort of like I suppose people would call that masochistic, isn't it?
No, we just...
But it's not like that. It's
yeah,
like
it's...
you look forward to finding your next thing because you know once you've found it, you now have the ability to solve it.
That's right. And once
Either with God's help or through your own actions. With God's help, it's about praying, being repentant about the cause. So that has to be a sincere feeling. But if you don't have that, then it's going to be the law of compensation and reparation that comes into action that will cause you to negate the effects of your own, the cause of your own sin, right? Which are all to do with your spiritual and emotional belief systems that are inside. Yeah, many of which are not your mum and dad's fault. Many of you have emotional and spiritual belief systems that are completely opposite to your mums and dads. Right? So you've got to stop saying to yourself, it's all the childhood injuries that caused me to feel this way. No, it's not. It's a lot of decisions that you made as a growing person and then as an adult that caused the sin to be attributed to you. It'd be very unfair of God to attribute your parents' sin to you. So he doesn't. He attributes your sin to you. That makes sense, right? It's a loving thing to attribute to the person who creates the sin, their sin, the effects of it, and eventually to find the cause. So we would like to recommend to you to have more of an attitude of, I want to be interested in knowing. And even if it's just knowing, like in my head knowing, that's better than not knowing anything, isn't it? But then to understand that just knowing in my head and then changing in action is not fixing it. Because that's not the cause. The cause is the feelings, the belief systems that I have. They're going to need to be addressed, right? And if you can discover them and address them, then what happens is that you can pray to God for forgiveness in a state of repentance because you know what the problem is that you're praying about, right? And this will cause you to be able to constantly receive God's love rather than just receive it for a little bit and then not receive it ever again. And hopefully you continue that process right the way through, while you're on earth, right the way through to getting rid of all of your sins with other people, which happens when you hit the sixth sphere. And then in the seventh, getting rid of all of your sins with yourself and God. Right? And then by the time you reach at one with God, you'll be sinless. And nobody on earth really knows what that feels like aside from myself. Yeah?
I'll let her go first. Sorry. I was just going to say, I feel like though that he's my biggest trigger. He is
He's your biggest trigger. He's the reason for all your pain and suffering.
Yes, no. I'm actually grateful for all the triggers that he has brought into my life. I have had a lot, and I also felt like a lot of it was though from my dad. Like he reminded me of many areas and reminded me of my dad.
Yep.
And I've come far, I feel like. but-
Can I say though that he's not your biggest trigger?
Okay. Okay.
Your biggest trigger is your resistance to your own sin. That's your biggest trigger. Can you understand why? Another person is not your biggest trigger. Right? The biggest reason why you have reactions is because of the sin that exists inside of you. That's the biggest cause of your reactions.
So sometimes the relationship exposes that resistance.
Correct.
Yeah.
But don't, whenever you say, she's my biggest trigger, what are you really doing?
You're becoming responsible.
Projecting.
If they only changed.
Then I would be so much calmer if they weren't like
Yeah.
how they are.
Judging.
Yeah. So you got to understand that when it comes to sin, you're your biggest problem, not somebody else. So continue under that assumption.
But I've often had big cries about how different emotions came up from my dad, memories from what I experienced with my dad when I was little and stuff.
Yeah, it's wonderful how your soul attracts a person who can remind you of things that you've got problems with somebody else, isn't it?
Yeah. I don't even believe he's my soulmate, but we are great, I feel like, together because
Well, you don't know whether you're soulmates or not.
I know.
No idea.
Yeah, that's right. And that's all right. Because remember, you're not going to know until you've dealt with a lot of your intergender issues.
Yeah.
So that's okay too. Yeah.
But I often feel...
But you can, when you say, I don't believe he is, can you see you've already got a belief?
It's sort of like the flip side of this lady we were talking to.
It's the exact problem, same
an
problem,
arrogance.
in the flip reverse.
Yeah.
Sort of like, this person can't be.
Yeah.
How do you know?
I'm open to it. If he is, that's great. If not, it's also great. But either way...
Well, I wouldn't call that open.
Okay.
Yeah, I would call that already having a predefined idea. Yeah?
Okay.
Yeah? Okay. Go on. Do we get to the...
Is there a question?
Yeah.
I
forgot now. Sorry.
The homework part that we were talking about, I experienced that yesterday, and then this morning again, I experienced it again. I now recognize it very clearly that I was arguing, the sin was arguing against the thing that I was being triggered, or that I was also like, he's just not getting it, he's just not understanding. Instead of saying something back, or saying all these things, I argued in my mind and recognized the feeling, what I was feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was trying to defend itself, and he just doesn't understand all that stuff. Like it. And then I realized, okay, this is it. This is what they're talking about, and that's exactly what I had experienced yesterday. That I had stopped and felt, and experienced that feeling that I was recognizing. I am arguing and fighting for the sin.
The sin. Yeah. It's when you're with a partner, it's often appropriate to sort of thrash things out a bit. How you do that, of course, will depend on how loving you actually are right now. Because if you do that thrash out in a very unloving manner, then that can do a lot of damage to your relationship. If you do it in a very kind and considerate manner, where what's your idea, what's my idea, that kind of thing, more like a detective sort of a manner, though we're sort of investigating and each of you are helping the other to investigate, then of course that can be a lot more loving, can't it? But they are not responsible for you finding out about you. Even if they're your soulmate, they're not responsible. The law regarding love determines that I have to be personally responsible for me finding out me. So whether the person triggers you, as you call it, or not, at the end of the day, you're responsible
Yes.
for working out what the cause is and the reasons for that are. Very important to bear that in mind. When somebody's prepared to help you, it is a gift, but you've got to be very careful that you don't enter the addiction for it, which is a sin.
Can you say that again, please?
Let's say I'm prepared to help you,
Mm-hmm.
and I give you some truth, and that does help you. And then you go,
I like that.
I like that. It was easier for me that way, for somebody to tell me, and somebody to like show me what.
Instead of discovery.
Instead of you now being in a process of discovery where you take the gifts offered as they're offered, you're now demanding that I help you. Now you're sinning again, right? And that's a spiritual belief actually about love that's false, in that if somebody loves you, they should always help you. That's not true. If somebody loves you, they may help you or not, depending on whether they want to. And there'll be times when they might not want to, or they might not feel the need to.
Because it might not be loving.
Sorry?
It might not be loving.
Well, if you have an addiction, it's certainly not.
Right.
So every time you exercise an addiction, it's actually unloving for me to help you.
Right.
Yeah.
Under those circumstances, right? So, you know, our beliefs about love in particular are going to determine a lot of our actions. Now, one of the things we want to do in future groups is to actually look at more closely at the definition of love, the definition of humility, the definition of truth, the definition of faith, and we want to examine how they feel. But how these things
Sort of like
feel.
your homework was, how does it feel to resist sin?
Yeah.
How does it feel to be humble? That's a feeling state, not just a set of behaviours. It's
Correct.
a feeling.
So what we want to do in the future is have these sort of long discussions, because they're going to be a couple of day discussions each time we have them, about how it feels, how does love feel, right? How would you define it to be? And you'll find that a lot of your current definitions of love are not love at all, right? Through that process. Just like your current different definitions of humility won't be humility at all, right? So it's good for us at some point to have those discussions in the future, but we really have to start with the point of feeling your sin, because they are the most dominant feelings you have right now. You follow me? At the moment, when we're in a state of sin, the most dominant feelings we have are the sin motivating me. I feel my sins more than anything. So an example of that is, let's say I believe a woman should care for my sexual and physical needs. My sin. There's going to be feelings attached to that, right? That I have saying, Mary doesn't love me if she doesn't do that. How does it feel when she does that for me? So I'm demanding something from her. When she gives it, how do I feel? I need to recognize the feeling of the addiction being met. So because that's my sin. I need to recognize what it feels like when it's met, and then if Mary doesn't do it, how does that feel? Now initially there'll be like things like anger and everything, but that's not the feeling. That's you trying to control the feeling. What's under that? What sadnesses do I have? What feelings do I have? Is when she does not give me, you know, when I come home from a hard day's work and my dinner's not on the table, how do I feel? Right? And a lot of men would just, what have you been doing all day? That kind of thing. And then, you know, but what's the feeling? So you can look at the action, but you can also, you can start analysing, well, what does he feel? He feels unloved, but is he unloved? Because love is a gift, right? So she doesn't have to give it. And isn't he responsible for his own food? Surely he should be. If he was completely self-responsible, he could come home from a hard day work and he has to cook as well. For himself at least. And if he was more loving, he'd cook for his wife as well. Right? And if he doesn't know how to cook, he'd learn. That's what he would do. So I would have to then feel, why do I feel And what do I feel to feel this imposition that I have upon Mary? What are the feelings? What are they like? So this is what we'd encourage you to do. Tomorrow we're going to sort of divert ourselves onto subjects relating to spirits and sin. So today what we'd like to leave you with is this. Use the time available that you have to start investigating how your sin feels like. What it feels when you get it met, and then what it feels like when you don't get it met. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Let yourself feel it, like, what does it feel like? And also be sensitive to what it feels like with different people. Because you'll actually find with your children, you'll have a different response than with your wife or your partner or your mother and your father. You'll have all sorts of different responses in different circumstances for good reasons, which you will have to discover. But to know what they are, you'll have to feel them. You know, you have to get to the stage where you go, oh, there it is, I want the mummy thing again. Yeah. Oh, there it is, I want the sex thing again. Mm-hmm. Oh, there it is, I want the caring feeling. Or I want the approval feeling again. Or I want the, superior feeling again. Or I want the, service thing again. Or, you start realising that what each feeling sort of feels like for you. And in the process of feeling it, you can start working on, is this a good thing or is this is this a bad thing? You can work on that. That's what I'd recommend you do with sin first. Because if you can become sensitive to that, when we start having conversations about what love is and what humility is and what faith is, you'll already be used to investigating feelings as a method of determining what they feel like. You get that? So that's what I'd recommend you do as homework before the next time we see you. Yeah? And Mary and I, our goal when it comes to sin, this sin stuff, is to actually give you more information about it. Right? So that's what we'll be doing over the course of the coming years, and even maybe in our next trip when we go around sort of the world again. And that'll sort of be more of our focus, like how can we educate you further about it? Yeah? And what we can do to help you identify them, what we can do to help you realise what the emotion is, and then how to actually get to a state where you feel repentant for it. Like, compared to just feeling like you want to keep doing it. Because when we start, you'll realise, I want to keep that, and I want to keep that, and I want to keep doing that, and I want to keep doing this, and I still want that feeling, I still want this feeling. That'll be the beginning of the process, and what we need to do is try to help you through education to get to the stage where you're saying to yourself, I reckon now I know what this is about, and I'm awakened to it, and now I'm in a position where I don't want it anymore, and I can feel I don't, and I'm sincere. And the reality is it's not that intellectual as I just described it, because you'll get to a point where your sincerity just bursts out of you with God. I need this, I want to, have this cause in me gone, and that's the state we would like to help you get to. When you get to that state, God's love can come, get rid of the cause, and you'll notice the next day you will feel different. The next day, you will not continue your same behaviour. It won't be like taking months or years to make changes. It'll be after you've forgiven, the next day, you will no longer feel the motivation to do the same thing ever again. That's how it works. Right? So you'll know when that happens, because the next day you'll no longer do the thing. You'll no longer feel like doing it. You'll no longer be driven to do it. You'll see it everywhere around you as well, as a part of the eyes opening and becoming awake, right? You'll see it everywhere else in other people's lives now, because it's not in yours anymore, because it's gone from you. And that's what we'd like to help you at least have one experience of one sin that you notice, and that happening. Because if you have that one experience, you go, wow, I need to do this like lots more, you know? So until you get the one experience, it's frustrating.
Yeah.
But as soon as you have that one experience, you'll start going, this is what I can do with everything. You know, every sin I face, I can do this. And I'll make changes. And also, by the way, your life will change because you'll make decisions in harmony with the change as well. You'll make decisions and choices in harmony with the change.
So I've heard your definition of sin in the past.
Yep.
Missing the mark of love.
Yep.
But since we're on the subject of sin and we're looking at it in a new day, I'm wondering if either today or tomorrow you can just define it a little bit, give a little bit more of a definition.
No, that's the only definition I can give.
Okay.
It is missing the mark of love. It's exactly that. But remember, every one of God's laws has been established with its underlying foundation as love. So when you sin, you're often breaking many hundreds of laws. And sometimes many thousands of laws when you sin. Because every time your feelings are in disharmony with love, you are lawless. You're out of harmony with the law. Right? So there is no other definition of sin. Sin is the breaking, the feeling to break God's laws. Missing the mark of love. Not missing the mark of love as an action, but missing the mark of love as a feeling. You know, so this is why a lot of people say, but I did this and I did that. And like, remember yesterday morning when I said, but I did all these wonderful things in your name. Like I took all these wonderful actions. And I said, my response in the first century was, get away from me, I don't even know you. You're workers of lawlessness. Because what matters is not the actions you've taken, although they will change. It's the feeling you have that will change your actions. That's the feeling that's in disharmony with the Lord is the sin, and the feeling that's in harmony with law results in perfect love in action. Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's finish for the day, shall we? Must be fairly late now. Can we say to you, firstly, it's great to see you engaged. It's very good. Most of you are well engaged, and that's very good to see. Secondly, I was going to say, you are the first group who have had full attendance.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
We thank you for that, but you just sinned again. It's not a competition.
But I can acknowledge, thank you very much.
Yeah, we just want to acknowledge that.
Respecting your booking and honouring your booking.
Very, very good. Now, I know that attendance day is a bit